Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Rias seal Naruto after every injury harem part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. We find the wandering immortal sage walking down a dirt path in the forest of Fire Country with the face of someone at peace with themselves. But if you looked closer, you could see a man who has gone to hell and back for those he cherished with the strength to oppose a god if he so chose to, but more importantly, you would see a tired soul, someone who has done what he has dreamt of, fulfilled the goals placed upon his shoulders by those who put their dying faith in his hands, and has finally been allowed to take a break from his labors and to rest. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the Nidaime Rakuto Sennin, and the Jinchuriki to the 9 Bijuu of the elemental nations, but to those of the younger generation he is known as the hero of the 4th Great Shinobi War over 150 years ago. The blonde himself hasn't been seen in the public eye since the end of the war, but he has been keeping a watchful eye over the peace he and his comrades had sacrificed everything to achieve, and has decided that he is no longer needed, deciding that it's high time he took a vacation of sorts. But his walk down memory lane was cut short as he arrived at his destination, where we rejoin the story. "It's been a while since my last visit here," he said in a somber tone, overlooking a monument built for the true heroes of the war. The monument itself was a large rectangle obelisk with the names of those who fought in the war. It was Naruto's project over the years to carve the name of every last shinobi who fought against Madara's army, so they would not be forgotten, and also my last, so I thought I'd make it special, he said, unsealing a bowl of ramen-ited akimasu, as Naruto ate his ramen with a far slower pace than he was known for, as he looked over the names of his precious people for the last time. The names of his parents Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze, his godparents Uraya and Tsunade, the Konoha 12 Lee, Tenten, Niji, Shikamaru, Ino, Choji, Shino, Sakura, Kiba, Hinata, Sasuke. Even after all you did, you fought by our side one last time as Team 7. His thoughts were halted by the sound of dripping, only for him to notice he was crying, not from regret or guilt from their deaths, but from the happy memories of his time with them. He had long ago made his peace with their passing and moved on, and he didn't want to end up like Kakashi staring at a stone for hours on end, dwelling on the past. Well, at least I don't read that smut of his constantly, he chuckled, drying his eyes, standing up, bowed low to the monument. I promise you will not be forgotten. I will keep you all alive in my heart and my soul. Goodbye Kasen Tausen everyone, goodbye. After that Naruto turned and left back down the path with a purpose. After it's not every day you travel to another dimension for a new life and a new adventure. Looking closer at the last Uzumaki standing at a height of 1.8 meters, you could see that his golden hair has developed some highlights of the trademark Uzumaki red, styled similar to that of his father, held out of his eyes by a unique headband with 3 symbols, the center for the Shinobi Alliance, the left for Konoha, and the right for Uzushio. His sapphire eyes now with slitted pupils along with darker whisker marks on his cheeks, his dark blue shirt underneath a custom coat like his father's that has light blue flames along the hem with a dark purple tree in behind the flames, and stitched in the leaves of the tree is the kanji for will of fire. His black cargo pants are adorned with gold bands around the ankles and held up with a dark yellow belt with a buckle styled after the Kyuubi's head, finished off with a pair of dark gray combat boots. 3 days later, since Naruto was last at the memorial monument, he has been busy on his latest project that would have had any seal master gaping at the complexity and size. This particular seal is designed to transport living organisms through dimensions to another one that has similar life forms to that which is being transported. This is accomplished by Naruto, using his sage mode to sense them to form a link, then using his vast reserves to make a bridge or tunnel to travel through in an instant. It was based off his father's Hiraishin technique, but given that his chakra is quite dense, it acts as a marker, dropping the requirement for the special kunai. Although they can be useful, there are only 2 downsides to the seal itself. The first being that it requires a large space to be drawn, as it easily spans 20 meters across. The second is that once the seal is out of chakra and completed the jump, it burns away from the strain of cutting a hole in dimensions, thus rendering it impossible to make it back via the seal for another jump. Although for Naruto, he considers this a plus, as it would be disastrous for someone to use a seal like this for their own gains. We now find the blonde meditating to sage mode to create a link to start the process. Okay, now all I have to do is find another world that hopefully has humans and not life-threatening. Should be easy. Maybe, he deadpanned to his line of thought. Really didn't think that part through. No use complaining now, it will just take a while. He paused as he got a rather strong link to 2 very different places. One felt as if there was conflict with 2. No 3 forces fighting for control, but not actively so. One energy none too different to Yakai of the Bijuu with the other pure, but the third energy felt like the second only tainted him. That could be interesting. Let's see what this other world has before I choose. In the second world he sensed faint scarring from war that he knew all too well. But the scars were not recent, meaning that this world was currently experiencing peace. But strangely, there was a large amount of lightning element he could feel, like when he visited the city of Snow Country. Damn it, I can't choose which to follow him. Oh. I know I'll flip a coin if it's heads I'll follow T. It was the twilight hours off the shore of Japan, where the peaceful and calm waters were violently thrown into motion, as a large twirling maelstrom formed with the force of a hurricane, as it continued to grow, forcing the water below to mimic its movements. Alarms of warning systems in vessels out at sea were running haywire at the high concentration of lightning and high-speed winds, as the massive dark clouds exploded in light and a thunderous roar, as if Thor and Zeus were fighting a fierce and bloody battle. But as the violent force of nature reached its climax with a final flash of light, it suddenly became calm and silent, and still not even 30 seconds had passed since its arrival and subsequent end. All those at sea who witnessed the maelstrom's sudden appearance will be ignored and ridiculed for making up stories or having too much to drink. But what they didn't notice was the sight of a certain blonde-haired man running across the ocean's surface. Kuoh Academy. As the immortal was making his way to shore, he didn't take into account that there may have been those who could sense his arrival. Ara, did you feel that Butchu Akeno said to her king as she entered the main room of the Occult Research Club with a tray of tea. Yes, I did, Rias responded, looking out the window, somewhat curious of what could generate the amount of power she could feel offshore. It seems things are going to be quite interesting this year, Akeno, she said, turning from the window and sitting on the couch next to her childhood friend. It would seem so, Butchu, although I couldn't sense what that surge of power came from. It felt like one of our own, and easily that of a high-class devil. But for us to feel it from as far as I think it is, would mean it was also very potent, analyzed the Raven Beauty as she picked up her tea awaiting the orders of her king. Akeno, I want you to send your familiar to the area of the surge and see what it can find. We will need all the information it can get in case the owner of the power surge becomes a threat, Rias ordered as she turned to retire to her study at the back of the club room. Hi, Butchu, Akeno replied, following the crimson-haired girl. Minus 30 kilometers from shore. Okay, note to self, make sure to target land next time, Naruto muttered to himself as he glided across the water's surface, dodging the large swordfish trying to impale him. I said I was sorry. I didn't mean to step on you, goddamn woe. Watch it, you damn sardine. He yelled, barely dodging a lunge aimed dangerously low on his person. Minus 2 hours later. Ugh, I hate fish, he whined while emptying his pockets of stray fish and occasional feather from a few unfortunate seagulls. Crouching down to one knee and placing 2 fingers to the ground, Naruto sends a pulse of chakra through the ground to mingle with the natural chakra residing in the ground. This technique he developed when he needed to find the locations of enemy ninja back in his homeworld, when the option of entering Sage mode wasn't viable or too time-consuming to risk being immobile for so long. Although with it no longer a problem for him, the pulse technique is more efficient at mapping terrain and life forms than Senjutsu. After finding a high population of energy further inland, he cancelled the technique and followed his mental map towards the city. In a city close to Kuoh, our resident sage was currently using a transformation jutsu to blend into the mass of people flooding the sidewalk dressed in grey slacks, a blue t-shirt and a brown hoodie, in order to keep a low profile. He had just sent a squad of disguised clones to investigate his surroundings and gather as much information on this new world as he can without raising alarm from the city's inhabitants. Now normally he would have taken a different path, but he couldn't pull it off without killing at least one person, so good old-fashioned reconnaissance was the way to go. Man, if I didn't go to see Koyuki-chan every couple of years, this would have been pretty overwhelming. Some of this stuff was only in the prototype stage in Spring Country, he said in a tone that didn't even attempt to hide his awe at the advanced technology displayed in store windows and posters. But as he was glancing around trying not to look like a tourist, he heard the sounds of a struggle in an alleyway not too far from a bar he had considered entering to gather information, and as he entered the alleyway, he saw something that made his blood boil. Hiroshi Yamakaze, a local loan shark, was currently carrying out one of his many duties, which in his own opinion was one of his favorites, beating on the people who can't pay him back in time. It was the thrill, the power he had over them that got his adrenaline going, and at the moment he was wailing on some pretty young thing that needed his assistance in affording repairs to her bar after an unfortunate accident. You think you can just take our money and not pay us back, huh? He said after kicking the bar owner. Hiroshi Yamakaze, a local gang thug and serial rapist, was in a secluded back alley midway through beating his latest catch into submission, so she wouldn't fight back too much. It was quite simple, really, a little distraction there, and a quick swapping of her drink here, and we have a young woman on her way across town, quickly losing her ability to walk and talk soberly, but more importantly unable to call for help, although the bitch did put up more of a fight than the rest had. Maybe I should increase the dosage next time, he thought to himself, as he tied up the young woman who was now gauged, but glaring heatedly at her attacker, only to receive a harsh slap from Hiroshi. Now, none of that, you're going to be nice and submissive, and I might let you go, he leered at her body, but taking a chance she kicked him and his equipment to hopefully give her more time, but only succeeding in pissing off her attacker. Arg. You bitch. I was going to be nice and let you live, but I'm not going to, so merciful, he growled, pulling out a blood-stained pocket knife and prepared to swing at his helpless prey, but his wrist was caught by someone. "I think that's enough of that," stated the blank foreboding voice from behind him, as Hiroshi slowly turned to see the owner of said voice, only to see shadowy details of a young male. But what truly terrified him was the slitted blue sapphires that practically gloated him ominously. Look pal, I don't know who you think you are, but you better scram before your G crunch ah." His timidly threatening speech interrupted by his wrist and forearm, simultaneously being crushed into shards by Naruto as the offender stumbles backwards till he hits the alley wall. "My arm. Look what you did, do you have any idea who you just messed with? Do you? When my boss hears of this he will snap ahhhh god why?" Came the thug's cry as he tried in vain to caress both of his broken arms, not noticing that his attacker slowly striding up to him until he hears his voice next to his ear. "Why don't you do the smart thing and run back to your boss and get a doctor for your useless arms, and if I ever catch you or your friends preying on the defenseless again, even the Shinigami's punishment will seem tame to what I'll put you through, you get me?" Nods shakily. "Good, now run," and the broken thug runs off to whatever crime boss's peril he's on. At this point the damsel in distress has gotten most of her motor functions back and is now staring at her savior with a grateful and somewhat fearful look, although not in fear of him but for him, which he makes a mental note of as he helps untie the ropes and pulling her to her feet, but she stumbles back. "Whoa there, don't try to move around too much. Here, let me help you," he tells the young woman as he puts an arm around his neck. "You're an idiot." You know that she finally speaks to the sage, "Letting that guy go like that has put a target on your back. The Iron Hand won't take kindly to one of their own being beaten even if he is weak." "Well, I have been called that before, but if helping those in need when I have the power to do so is idiotic, then I guess I am." They both chuckled. "Suo, could I have the name of the young woman I just saved? I'm Naruto by the way, Naruto Uzumaki," he said to break the silence as they walked limped out the alley. "I suppose it couldn't hurt. I'm Minami Ichigawa, owner of the bar down the way, and thanks for saving me back there. I didn't think I would have made it out otherwise," she replied, sobering tone as the rest of the drug continued to leave her body. "No need to thank me, I was just doing what anyone would have," he replied, giving her one of his foxy grins. "Still, I am grateful. How about I give you a free beer as a reward?" she finished with a smile. "Sure, I could go for a cold one," replying with a smile of his own, knowing full well that she was trying to put up a strong front and keep him near her as long as possible. Speaking of Minami, he gives her a once over and couldn't help but find her attractive, and her unique hairstyle only added to her looks, with her auburn hair parted in the middle, with one side shaved shortly in a pattern, while the other side came across her exotic-looking royal purple eyes to her cheek in a shaggy manner. Her face, while not petite, held an air of a strong-willed person, and judging by her build and the way holds herself, she's been in a few fights and knows how to handle herself, not to mention the intricate cross tattoo on her left forearm in particular caught his eye. Her clothing was a bit of a mess after the struggle, but her dark green blouse and slate gray slacks were undamaged. He would have continued his appraisal, but thought better of it. He didn't want to make her feel threatened with any flirting, so they both walked to her bar in comfortable silence. Meanwhile, with the clones, clone number 5 was currently in a music store perusing the selection of songs available and listening to a few here and there. You see, when you have nothing but time to waste, hobbies are what Naruto filled his time with, one of them being playing and singing music, which combined with Shadow Clones as a portable band. Well, let's just say that he has a mild obsession for musical media, and for clone number 5 this was a goldmine of new material. Of course, without money he couldn't afford anything, so he quietly walked out of the store to continue his recon mission and maybe come across some way to make money. In an abandoned church near the red light district, on a cracked throne at the back of the abandoned church, sat a somewhat intimidating figure, a man who looked in his mid-30s with dark brown and combed back hair, wearing what appeared to be an old-styled mafia suit and a dull gray with matching dress shoes, but on his face was an off-putting visage for an otherwise handsome man. On the left part of his face was a gruesome-looking scar starting at the top of the nose, leading through his left eye socket, as the eyeball itself was absent, continuing to the ear. The area around the scar looked as though it was burned horribly by intense flame. Said scar he was currently glaring at using a pocket mirror until one of his henchmen entered through the bulky wooden doors. "Forgive my intrusion, Nagasama, but one of the scouts came back with a report that you may find interesting," the messenger stated, waiting for his leader's reply, which he receives in the form of a short nod. "The scout is Hiroshi, the one of the new recruits that you sent to the shop districts in the city. Apparently he was attacked while he was indulging himself, and his attacker left him with a shattered wrist and broken forearms," he continued calmly. "He also came with a warning stating that if we continue our extortion routine he will come and finish us off," he finished grimly, since no one yet have been able to discover their operation or threaten them for that matter. This stranger could be a serious threat, especially if the description is accurate. "Did the fool get a look at him before he ran off like a scared child?" he asked his messenger, curious now as to why he brought a trivial matter such as this before him, as this, although rare, has happened before, and the weakling will be disposed of as usual. Yes, he was wearing grey shirt and jeans with a brown-headed jacket. On his face are 3 markings on each cheek. Strangely enough, he was very hesitant on mentioning his eyes, but we were able to coax it out of him. Apparently they are deep blue with slitted pupils, and he happens to have a blonde and crimson red hair. Sir, he relayed to his master hesitantly as he watched his face contort into anger at the mention of hair color. I'm sorry, what color was his hair? And I want you to be very specific. He strained his words, slowly walking towards him. It was blonde and crimson, sir, like that of the Grimo AHHCK. He was interrupted by his lord's hand grabbing by the throat and yanking him face to face with a very angry fallen angel. The once calm and arrogant exterior of this crime boss, now replaced with a snarled visage with a scar upon his face, only adding to his already intimidating image, as his 6 raven-colored wings appeared upon his back in full display. With his servant squirming in his grip, he spoke in a voice embodying the hate and anguish on his face. Don't say that twice, damned name, in my presence, do you understand me, servant? He finished mockingly as the messenger nodded quickly and was rewarded with his ability to breathe again, taking deep gulps of air to regain his composure so as to not anger his master further. I want you to send a few of the strays we rounded up to test him and see if he is from that clan, and if he is, then I will take my pound of flesh. I owe that bastard with interest. Well, what are you waiting for? Get out of my sight, he snarled to the frightened man. Right away, Nagasama, he replied, running out of the room. Soon I will repay that which you did to me. Back to our blonde hero. So this place is yours, huh? It's nice, kinda got a homey feel to it, the sage commented on the bar in which he and the owner were currently relaxing in. The stained wood finish that covered the walls and floor, complemented by the dark leather accent panels that made you feel safe and protected. The army green carpet was a nice touch that made it seem more like a family room for people to connect and enjoy life. It was very much unlike most bars he visited in the elemental nations, but a welcome change. Said owner smiled warmly at the comment, but to sharper eyes, you would have seen the moment of sadness flash across her face at the mention of home, which didn't go unnoticed by him. Yeah, it is, but hey, why don't I get that drink I owe you? She replied to change the subject, turning to the back of the bar to hide any emotion from her savior, not wanting to ruin the mood. Sure, I would like that. It's sorta been a long day, hasn't it? He answered, sensing that she was in conflict with her emotions at the moment, and after receiving his pint, decided to change the subject to something new. So you live here then? There was a second pause from Minami before she answered. Yeah, I do. Business hasn't been so great recently, so I decided to move in to cut costs. What gave me away? She asked, curious at how he figured it out so quickly. It was your posture. A raised eyebrow was his response. When we were walking here you kept a guarded and tense posture, but once you got inside you relaxed, although not all the way, which I suspect is because of either my presence or you are expecting something. It was also your eyes. He stared right into her eyes with a warm and understanding look. When I mentioned home, sadness flickered through them. Although you are good at concealing it, only someone who has lost a loved one would be able to see it. He finished with a sad smile of his own as she stood there looking at him in somewhat shock that someone she has only known for less than an hour has already learned so much about her. You know, it does help to talk about it. I know what it's like to be given something by a loved one that had cost their lives to pass down, and at first you don't know how to feel when you find out. Then you become angry at it, not because you hated it, but for how you received it, and you ask yourself why they had to die. Why couldn't they have left it for someone else to take it? Why did it have to be you? At this point he knew he guessed correctly as to the source of her sadness, as evident by the now teary-eyed bartender trying to keep her composure in front of him. He slowly got off his stool and walked to her. As he did, he continued. Then you learn that it couldn't have been anyone else. They couldn't have trusted anyone else than their own flesh and blood with the burden that they were to leave behind and rest without worry or regret. Instead they pass on with pride, knowing that you would make them proud. He finished as the woman in his embrace cried in his chest after Naruto once again rid another soul of contempt and grief, replacing it with acceptance and determination as he once did for Koyuki all those years ago. After Minami calmed down, she opened up about her past, where Naruto discovered her father was the former owner of the bar. He was an immigrant from Ireland and built the bar himself after deciding to settle down with his wife, who he met here. But her mother passed away shortly after she turned 11, and she took to helping her father in the bar for many more years, until 3 years ago he was murdered in an alley with his murderer evading arrest. He wanted this to be a home for the people you know. Since mom died, he worked hard to make sure those down on their luck or had nowhere to go could find a family and us to laugh and sing with. It was such a warm place to be. He was never without a smile on his face, and when I asked him why, he told me because if I didn't smile, what reason would others have to do the same? Sometimes people just need someone else to give them one when they can't find it themselves. As I guess I forgot that over the years Naruto could only smile. As Minami continued to describe her father, seems the will of fire hasn't died out like I thought. If people like him exist, this will have a bright future. Hours later, after talking a while longer and a few more drinks, the blonde prepared to leave as it was already late and didn't want to overstay his welcome. Minami-chan, it's pretty late, so I'll let you get some sleep. He finished walking towards the door but was stopped by a pair of arms hugging him from behind. Naruto, thank you for what you said earlier, it meant a lot to hear it. He turned in her grip to return the hug. Hey, what are friends for? If you want I can come by again tomorrow, if you'd like. He grinned sheepishly. I should have some money to buy a drink this time. They chuckled at his words, since the one free drink turned into a few more than intended. I would like that. And with that Naruto left McGinty's bar and walked to a park he found earlier to allow his clones to dispel and manage the information collected. On a rooftop across from McGinty's, 3 figures stood atop a darkened apartment building as they watched their target leave the bar and head towards the center of the city. So that's the guy who has our boss all antsy. Doesn't look like much to me, just some pretty boy, spoke the bald figure to the right, garbed in a sleeveless shirt, jeans with a gray trench coat with metal shoulder plates over the top. I hate to say it, but I agree with Chrome Dome here. I don't feel any amount of power coming from him, spoke the second figure to the left in a similar appearance to his comrade, but instead he had a full head held back in a tight ponytail at the back of his head. He turned to look at their third member and apparent leader of the group, ignoring the glare he received from the bald comment, awaiting their orders. It appears this was a waste of time on our part, seeing as no one, especially a high-class devil, can suppress their power fully. It seems he is only human, perhaps one of higher than average strength, but human all the same. The leader paused to think, as their orders haven't changed all that much. They were told to fight the suspected Gremory and then report on his ability and if possible capture the woman he rescued to see what information she has on him. Okay, here's what we'll do. Hisato, you and Tessai head after the main target. I want you to wait until he's out in the open and take care of him. We don't know if this is a trap or not, so be careful, he ordered the more responsible of the two. While you're doing that I will take the girl back to the boss to deal with her. The two subordinates were about to leave when they were stopped by the cold voice of their leader, and Tessai, the bald man, turned and froze at the sight of his leader's intense gaze. Don't do anything stupid, said man shakily, nodded and replied quickly. Hi Niso Taichu. Happy with the answer, he spread his wings along with the other two and took off for their objectives. With Naruto, currently the young immortal was meditating in the center of the grassy area of the park, processing all the information his clones had collected, and he was both amazed at the extent of this world's technology, but also disgusted at how lazy people had become because of it, but he really couldn't do anything about since this was how the world was. He was quite interested in the vast varieties of music and instruments available. I will definitely have to go back to that shop my clone found once I get some cash to spend. It's been quite some time since I've had a good rock out. Since I'm here I can complete my mental map of the city, since my clones couldn't cover it all without raising suspicion. With that thought he sent out a chakra pulse down into the ground, and as he did he picked up large amounts of energy in 4 locations around the city. The energy felt like chakra, but different and corrupt. Actually 2 of the signatures were at the tree line behind him. This could be interesting. With Hisato and Tessai, the 2 fallen angels, were behind 2 rather thick trees facing the back of their target. They had been following him from the air for a while now, after figuring out that he was moving to the perfect location to ambush him. What is this guy doing? He's been sat there still as a statue for 10 minutes now. If I didn't know better, I would have thought he was dead, whispered a frustrated Tessai. Hisato could only shake his head at how easy his friend was agitated, but he did have a point. He hasn't moved an inch since he arrived, so perhaps now would be the opportune time to strike. Nodding at his logic he signaled to his partner to follow his lead. After receiving a nod in response they made their move. They both bolted from their cover, light sword in hand, and with a synchronized motion, they swung at the target's neck, receiving a satisfying sound of blade piercing flesh, followed by 2 thuds as body and head fell to the ground. Ha 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 ha, was that it? I thought with Taichu warning us like that something was gonna go wrong, you know, like some James Bond shit or something. Tessai laughed, only to receive a smack upside the head from Hisato. What do you mean warn us? He warned you dumbass not to risk the mission. Besides, it could have gone a lot worse than it did. The more responsible of the 2 reprimanded, only to get a scoff in return. Well, it didn't. We killed the Gremory bastard, and now we can go back to base to meet up with Niso Taichu. Stop being such a worrywart, he dismissed lazily, and as they prepared to walk off they heard the voice of the supposed dead target. You know it's not polite to behead people for no reason. They both turned to see the man they just killed turn into mud and the real one exit the foliage to their left. Moments before, after substituting with a mud clone to take the hit, Naruto hid in the shadow of a tree in order to find out any information he can on his would-be killers, and after hearing the idiot bald one openly blab about their orders, he grew curious. Gremory? Who are they? I don't think they are a normal clan if these are the kinds of assassins they have to deal with. What's the deal with those energy swords they just formed out of thin air, kinda like my chakra chains? So it appears there is more to this world than I originally thought. I think it's time to ask some questions, he thought, walking into the clearing. Currently, both of the fallen were in shock, although one hit it well. It was still startling that the supposed human had just survived their attack with some sort of Earth-based fake of himself. The first to voice their thoughts was Tesai. How the foo when did you fucky what the fuck was that? Tesai stated to the extent of his vocabulary. Shut up you idiot. This isn't a time to drop your guard. It appears we underestimated him, though I expected nothing less from a member of one of the 72 pillars. Hisato spoke to try and buy time to form another plan, since they lost the element of surprise. Naruto, knowing of his tactic, decided to play along to hopefully find out more without resorting to violence. Well, I appreciate the compliment, but I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else. I don't know of anyone by the name of Gremory, but I'm sure we can resolve this peaceably without resorting to violence, Naruto asked calmly, as to not agitate an already tense situation and get them to lower their guards a little just in case. Ha. Like we'd fall for that. Of course you are. No one outside of that clan has red hair, even if it's got blonde in it, so what, you from the Bale clan as well? Who cares, you can be killed just like Anyo Arg. A slap up the head stopped his idiotic rant. Will you shut up? What did Taichu say about being stupid? I think picking a fight with an unknown counts as stupidity, he angrily whispered to his idiot of a partner. What, he doesn't look like much and the way he talks is like some tree hugger. He can't be too strong. The two argued back and forth, ignoring the sage as he himself was deep in thought. Gremory. Bale. This is becoming a mess. I need to learn more. Perhaps their leader will be more helpful. Wait, where is the captain they keep referring to? At the bar, Minami was currently walking around the bar thinking back on her father and the memories of she and him had made here, the strangers and those considered part of the family that used to fill the room with cheers and laughter, the occasional song thrown in on a special occasion. It made her realize what her father was trying to do. He was trying to give her a family that she didn't have, all the uncle and brother figures that would help her out with her car or give wisdom when she had a problem. There was even a few sister and auntie figures she could lean on when her life needed a woman's touch. She never realized how silent it was now that the laughter had left, but it now filled her with determination to bring it back to her former glory and make her father proud. Funny how it took the words of a stranger to help me realize that. I don't think I have smiled that much since dad was here. I wonder if he'll consider taking a job. Her knocking. Grrr. Can't people read the closed sign? Damn idiots, she thought, walking over to the door, planning to give the knocking a black eye. Reaching the door, she swung it open, about to give the person a piece of her mind, but she froze under the gaze of the shadowy figure in front of her. But the light from indoors only giving her a view of his clothes. The tall man was wearing a custom trench coat of some kind. As it was closed and hooded, she couldn't see the wearer, except for the bottom half of his face that had a cold smirk planted on it, as if he was pleased with the power trip of his mere presence, frightening the woman in front of him. Minami Ichigawa, your presence has been requested of by my employer. He spoke in a tone that wouldn't take no as an answer. Well, what? Your employer? Look, I'm just the owner of a rundown bar. Whatever you're looking for I don't have, so if that's all I'm gonna have to ask you to leave so I can lock up pal, she told him after shaking of the fear she felt for him, only for it to come back full force with his next words. I'm afraid you don't have any say in the matter, he said, grabbing her arm and delivering a punch to the gut, knocking her out. Placing her over his shoulder, he took off into the night. I hope those two idiots have finished their job, even if the guy won't be able to fight back. We can't have anyone looking for the girl. Once she's been dealt with, unfortunately for him, he will be the only one making it. Back to base. Back at the park, my first attempt at a fight scene. Sorry if it sucks. Ahem, are you two going to keep at this or are we going to fight? Naruto said, getting the attention of the two bickering fallen angels. Hisato, who once realizing that they forgot about him, was quite frustrated with his bald accomplice. Clearing his throat, he responded, yes, it seems we have wasted enough time, and regardless if you are of Gremory or Bale descent, we have orders to kill you, with both of them becoming serious and somewhat eager to fight once again, creating swords of light, but this time releasing their raven wings. This action getting a mental shrug from Naruto, since it wasn't not the weirdest thing he's seen. After seeing their choice of weapon, he decided to follow suit. You want a sword fight, do ya? Well then, I don't want to be left out, do I? Tenten would kill me if I passed up a sword fight, he said, getting raised eyebrows from the two that quickly changed to looks of shock at what happens next. Extending one hand towards them as if holding the handle of a sword, white chakra with a golden glow gathered in his grip and then swirled in an outward cone from his hand in a line, and as the cone followed its intended path, the existence of a sword was left in its wake. The sword itself was pure black, except for the number 31 in silver on the side of the blade. The blade and handle was a meter long in all, with no curve or guard present as found in katanas, but had a slight curve towards the tip that finished in a diagonal straight edge. Both fallen were a little taken back by the ability and its similarity to their own, but what was more alarming was the surge of energy they felt as the sword was created, as they felt nothing from the man before them before or after its creation, meaning that he is fully capable of hiding his strength from them, which could spell trouble if they act stupid, which unfortunately is what Hisato's accomplice was about to do. Okay, I admit that was impressive, but it won't do you any good, you're still outnumbered and outclassed. Come on, Hisato. Let's kill this bastard and head to base. With a flap of his wings he bolted towards Naruto. Wait, you idiot. We shouldn't rush in, damn it. He yelled quickly, following Tessai, hoping that numbers will be enough to take their opponent down. Naruto himself was calmly waiting for the fallen to reach him, analyzing them for any openings and how to exploit them. Quickly Tessai was upon him and lashed out with a flurry of slashes, using his wings to give quick boosts of speed to dodge all of Naruto's counters, not noticing that Naruto had yet to move from his spot or receive any hits. Hoping to catch him by surprise, Hisato came in from behind at the same moment Tessai was to strike at the front, hoping to overwhelm him, but it was for naught, as the horizontal swings aimed for his head and back were dodged as Naruto leant forward and barrel rolled above and below both attacks, whilst cutting Tessai across the torso and kicking Hisato in the side as he landed and jumped back from the two fallen to give them time to recover. Despite himself, Naruto couldn't help but give a slight smile at the rush of fighting strong opponents again after so many years. After a breather, the fallen charge again, this time deciding to attack from the front with Hisato in front and Tessai hanging back because of his injuries to try and catch him off guard. Hisato opens with a few thrusts to the head and torso, all of which are dodged or deflected with precision. He continued with an overhead strike that was sidestepped, but was quickly followed by an upward swing that Naruto jumped back to dodge right in front of Tessai, who now wielding two swords in a scissor motion, went to take his head off as Hisato rushed in and swung downwards, but Naruto was quicker and blocked the dual swords with his own at the joint of the two swords, followed by him quickly ducking, leading to Hisato's sword wedged in between Tessai's two before they could move back to gain space. Tessai and Hisato received a vicious palm strike to the stomach, sending them flying back. As they got back up, they noticed that they were both either side of Naruto and nodding. They unleashed a barrage of light spears to hopefully overwhelm him and keep him pinned down, but were getting more and more frustrated by the fact that their attacks were getting dodged or deflected by the now fully smiling blonde and crimson-haired man, who was now deflecting their spear's path to fly at each other, forcing them to move. Slowly they made their way to each other as they continued to throw light spears until they halted the attack to catch their breath. The two fallen, Hisato was trying to figure how an apparent human, a unique one but a human nonetheless, could hit so hard and move quick enough to keep up with their attacks. Looking over to his partner, he could tell he was thinking similar thoughts, although he seemed agitated at something and looked over at their target and saw he was smiling and became quite angry himself, but having better self-control didn't let it show, but the same could not be said for the other fallen angel. "Hey, what the hell are you smiling about?" yelled a frustrated Tessai. "Why am I smiling? Well, it's been quite a while since I've had a fight of this caliber, so I'm just enjoying it while I can," he answered honestly. "You see, after the Fourth Shinobi War, the occupation of shinobi slowly started to decline as the alliance was maintained in order to keep peace and balance in the elemental nations. This led to an increase in trade and other businesses, which helped Spring Country in particular, as they could now branch out into other types of technology instead of just military, and although this was good for the world overall, it did mean that people who Naruto could spar against was decreasing, and the only ones who still had any fighting capability were the samurai in the Land of Iron. There Naruto gained a certain respect to the art of sword fighting. Hisato was currently trying to find a way to defeat Naruto, and quickly. It wouldn't do well for Nisso to come looking for them when they should have finished this quickly and been back at base by now, but instead their opponent is much more than he appears. In an attempt to gain a little more time, he tries stalling again. "Since you appear to be a worthy foe, may I know the name of the man to die by?" Arblady asked with a strained voice, trying to hide his fatigue of expending so much energy during their fight. "Oh, that's right, I never introduced myself. I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," he replied sheepishly, since he was so focused on the fight he'd forgotten to do so before their fight. Tessai decided to voice his thoughts. "Uzumaki Namikaze? I've never heard of those devil clans before." "Devil clans? What made you think I was a devil?" "I am quite human, thank you very much." "Well, for the most part," Naruto answered, muttering the last part to himself. "Human, ha. Don't make me laugh, I won't believe that bullshit. But then again, it doesn't matter, once we get all the info that woman has you won't be able to." "What the fuhhhh. Crunch." The bald loudmouth's rant was interrupted by white chains erupting from the ground and wrapping him in a cocoon before violently descending into the ground with a sickening crunch followed by silence. Chains of the underworld, the technique's name, was all that pierced the deathly silence permeating the area as Hisato was also held down by chains, but they were not needed as the horror of what just occurred was overwhelmed by the killing intent the sage was releasing that seemed to thicken as the blonde turned his gaze towards him and walked towards him, stopping only a foot in front of the trembling fallen angel. "Now I am only going to ask you once, you lie to me and you will suffer a fate worse than death," he stated, placing his hand atop the terrified man's head. "Now where was the woman taken?" His tone, cold and commanding, quickly garnered an answer from Hisato. She's been taken to the abandoned church on the outer rim of the city near the East Red Light District. You can't miss it. His voice filled with fear, hoping it was enough for him to keep his life, and sighed in relief as Naruto nodded in acceptance, but he tensed at his next question. Will she be harmed by your leader? He asked with closed eyes, his tone still cold but hinting towards worry, his question putting his hostage in a corner, as he was conflicted between answering truthfully and perhaps being killed for it, or lying and being let live. He still had his loyalty to the fallen angels to take into account. His internal debate finished with a self-nod of reassurance. He answered, "No, she won't." There was a 10-second pause after his answer, and had hoped that he was going to let go until Naruto spoke, crushing any hope he had. "Hisato," with a gulp he answered. "Why yes." Naruto slowly opened his eyes, allowing Hisato to see that they had changed from blue to purple, with a strange ripple pattern, awaited Naruto's next words. "You were lying." And before Hisato could retort, eyes full of primal fear, his soul was ripped from his body and absorbed into Naruto's palm. As his eyes faded back to their sapphire blue, he stood there for a minute before he quickly took off in the direction of the church, hoping to make it in time to save Minami. "Hold on Minami, I'm coming for you, that's a promise." At the abandoned church earlier, walking towards the heavy double doors of the cracked and grey church, its appearance more befitting a tomb than a place of holy worship. Opening the doors, he walked down the hall to his leader's throne with only torches to guide him through the otherwise dark corridor, as he passed by the occasional human follower that are required for their operation, as fallen angels themselves are scarce, especially rogue ones. So using humans to take care of grunt work or to manage low-level jobs to keep out of the spotlight to angels and devils unless it is necessary, allows them to hit almost in plain sight. But the torches on the walls, it was now possible to see the face of the fallen Abel. He was to most a horrific sight. There was no place visible that wasn't riddled with scars, as if it were a fleshy jigsaw puzzle stitched together, and although not bald like his subordinate, his hair is sparse and blotchy, his blank face and brown eyes masked the cruel being hiding underneath. He arrived at the thick oak door. He knocked on the door, knowing better than to agitate his leader. As he was waiting to come in, he looked over to his cargo, the young woman he was ordered to capture and bring here, and saw she was still unconscious. Good, he didn't want to be on the receiving end of her cries for mercy or escape attempts. Besides, it was so annoying to capture females, they just didn't shut up. You just had to keep beating on them or gag them to get some silence. He was brought out of his inner monologue by a voice on the other side of the door calling him in. He entered the room, taking note of the lack of people in the room, besides the back of the man in front of him standing next to a chair with restraints on it. "Nagasama, I have collected the woman that was seen in the company of the green man as ordered," he told his leader quickly whilst kneeling, hoping he didn't catch his slip up. "Good, put her in the chair, then leave. I will be doing the interrogation myself." Niso nodded with silent relief and some disappointment for not being the one to torture her, but knew better than to argue with his superior, and quickly locked the woman into the chair and left to wait for his idiot subordinates, as they had taken longer than he expected. Oh well, he'll just have to punish them when they return. Inside the chamber, the fallen angel known as Nagas slowly turned and approached the incapacitated Minami and harshly slapped the woman to wake her. Well, harsh, it was effective as she was beginning to rouse from her slumber. "Oh my head, what the hell happened?" she thought, trying to raise her arm to nurse her face, but found she couldn't, and she opened her eyes a little. Then they shot open, seeing that she was not in her home, but a grey room with sparse furniture and a throne. "Where the fuck am I?" she muttered with fear in her voice, trying in vain to release her arms and legs from their bindings, but she stopped when she heard footsteps to her right, and from the shadows walked a man with a horrible-looking scar on the left side of his face, dressed in a something she'd seen in the Godfather movie, colored in varying shades of grey. She was more than a little unnerved at the malicious look he was giving her. "Hello Miss Ichigawa, I am Tetsuyuki Nagas, and you have information on someone I want dead." The widening of her eyes was all the response he needed. "I don't know who you're talking about," she said in defiance, hoping that it wasn't who she thought it was. Staring down her kidnapper, several thoughts ran through her head. Is it Naruto he wants? Why? What did he do to make this guy so pissed he'd go this far to get to him? "Oh, I believe you know exactly who I'm talking about, the young man that saved you from one of my men. You do realize that taking money from shady characters and refusing to pay them back is just asking for trouble. You never know when you might suffer another accident like that terrible fire a few months ago." Minami was in shock at what the man in front of her was insinuating. "That was you. You set fire to my father's bar just so you could extort me for money." She was quite pissed at that. She had been low on money to begin with, and when she was told of the fire that destroyed a portion of the bar, she was scraping the bottom of the barrel with her savings. Since she couldn't go to the bank for a loan, she needed the money. So when it was offered, she thought it was a blessing, but it was just a scam to fill his pockets. "Ah yes, your father, quite an honorable man, although stubborn. If he had taken the same deal you had, he might still be breathing. It was a shame. He would been a good business partner," he finished with a cruel smirk, as Minami just bowed her head at the realization that she had been inadvertently lining the pockets of her father's killer. She was disgusted with herself, like she had betrayed her father just after she had promised to make him proud. Her internal loathing was interrupted by a hand grabbing her by the chin and forcing her to look into his eyes. Now I don't have all day, so you are going to tell me everything you know of that man, and maybe I will show you mercy. He paused as the saliva launched at him hit his face. Mercy? What mercy? The same mercy you showed my father. I'm not telling you a thing, he hasn't done anything to you. Smack. Tetsuyuki retorted by striking her in the face again. Silence. He bellowed at the now silent captive as she gazed upon his raven-like wings. You will answer my questions, or you will suffer greatly by my hand. It won't matter how long it takes, no one will find you here. Your friend is probably dead by now, face it, no one is coming for you, he told her. No, Naruto, she whispered in grief, tears coming to her eyes once more. So his name is Naruto. Maelstrom. An odd name for a member of that clan, but then again, devils were always proud beings. It will be bliss to let them know of their family member's death, he spoke to himself, ignoring the glare being sent his way by the furious woman behind him, but still. Blonde and crimson is definitely rare, he must be a child of two clans. He approached the woman who was trying to escape her bindings, whilst his back was turned, but stopped as she saw him walk over to her. Woman, tell me what was his family name? He commanded, but was met with a defiant stare. Growling, he stabbed her in the thigh with a dagger of light. Tell me. He snarled over top her scream of pain as the unique dagger sunk into her flesh and cauterized it like hot iron, but instead of searing heat, it was a biting cold that turned the wounds purple and blue from the chill. But she remained defiant, even after the second dagger was buried into her thigh. It wasn't until the third light dagger was thrust through her forearm and into the chair's armrest that she caved. His name is Uzumaki Naruto Uzumaki T, that's it, I swear, why do you care? She spoke in heavy pants, trying to speak after yelling so long. She asked the question to try and delay the torture just a little longer. It matters because one of his parents was a member of that bastard clan that did this to me, he seethed, pointing to his scarred and burnt face. He did this as punishment for attacking his whore of a wife. His scar flared up in memory of that cursed day. Plyosh Bayek. You see, when he was working under the Grigori, he was known as the Frozen Fang, as his unusual ice-based light weapons, used most commonly in a unique rapier-style dagger, were not only stronger than average, but were quite lethal if used correctly. He was quite accomplished on the battlefield, hence the gaining of his moniker he had earned after a particularly brutal battle in which he had devastated the enemy and come out without serious injury. That one day he had overheard that a member of the Grimoire clan had married an ice user like himself. It turned out to be none other than Grafia Lucifuge, one of the survivors from the old Satan faction. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but that would end up being his downfall. People would joke and comment on him not being the best ice user anymore, that she had taken his spot after reports on her triumph in the battle again and again. Every time he accomplished something, he would be compared to her every single time. He couldn't take it, the prestige, the fame, all gone. It slowly ate away at him till he broke and decided that the only way to keep in the spotlight was to get rid of her, and after gaining his third set of wings, his ego grew along with his confidence, thinking that he could beat her and reclaim his title as the best. So when he heard from his spies that she had been spotted in a human town with her husband, he ran after them to kill her. In out, that was how it should have gone, but plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. He had followed them around and waited until her husband Serziches had run off in one of his childish moments. It was then that he chose to strike. Landing in front of her, he spoke, Grafia Lucifuge, I have been waiting a long time for this. I have been living in your shadow long enough. Today is the day I get the spotlight and never have to worry about you taking it again. He spoke in a slightly deranged tone as the ground beneath him froze over. You wish to fight me? Not many are foolish enough to do so. What is your name, fallen angel? She retorted calmly, not moving in the slightest, as if not taking him seriously, but the frost covering the ground would suggest otherwise. My name is Tetsuyuki Nagas, but today you will know me as your executioner, he spoke as he rushed towards Grafia, flaring his power into his attack as Grafia did the same. Then it all went white. Moments later, Tetsuyuki was beaten, bloody and frozen in some places, and missing his left eye via ice sword wielded by Grafia. Tetsuyuki couldn't comprehend what had happened. It had been so sure he would win, but now as he cradled his missing eye, he looked up from his position on his hands and knees to the woman that had just beaten him and saw the look she was giving him, not one of superiority or condescendence but one of disappointment, like he wasn't worth the effort, and it infuriated him. How dare she look at me like that? It was then he noticed she had turned around and started to walk off as if nothing had happened, which pushed him past his breaking point. That bitch. I'll kill her. And in a blind rage he rushed at her from behind with a light dagger in hand, but just as he was closing the gap between him and Grafia, there was a shout. Grafia? The woman in question turned and saw the fallen angel she thought was unable to move, let alone attack, moving towards her. She mentally berated herself, knowing she wouldn't have time to block it. There was a blur of red along with a yell of pain as Serziches subdued the man who dare make an attempt his wife's life, especially with such an underhanded tactic. It was lucky that he had arrived when he did, otherwise it may have ended differently. He looked over to her and saw she was okay, if but a little startled. Even if her stoic personality tried to hide it, she was grateful for the help. Giving her a nod, he turned to the man writhing in pain, holding his hands over the new burn thanks to Surzich's that happened to be located right where Graphia's attack landed on the left side of his face, cauterizing the wound, making it impossible to heal. His movement stopped when Surzich's shadow loomed over him. The man knelt down and whispered, "I should kill you where you lay for what you just tried, but that would only cause problems with the Grigori, and I don't need that, so I will let you live with the scar of your failure and the burn of my warning. Make another attempt on any of my family, and you will wish I had ended you this day." With his piece said, he stood and walked over to his wife before leaving in a flash of red. Be brought out of his memory by the sounds of panic on the other side of the door when one of the priests ran into the room with blind fear in his eyes. "Sir. We've got a problem," he yelled, running up to his leader yelling about attacks and demons until he was grabbed and lifted by the throat. "Calm yourself, priest, now tell me slowly what happened." The priest nodded and begun to relay what had happened. Moments before, outside the church, Naruto had arrived at the church a minute ago and was now perched in a tree across the courtyard, hidden by the shadows at the moment, but it won't be long before the sun starts to rise. He will have to move before then if he plans to sneak in. He was no longer in his civilian henge and back in his normal attire, apart from his coat, which was now black instead of white, along with the mask he was currently wearing. It was a mask he wore in his brief time as an Anbu, but he still managed to make a name for himself, as his mask wasn't normal by any of village's standards in his world. The mask was rounded at the top with a straight jawline with the Anbu symbol on the forehead above an X-like marking that connected to the top corner of the eye socket, and was followed by a line starting from the bottom outer corner of the socket towards the chin, with the kanji for demon in between. What was more frightening was the vicious-looking teeth on either side of the markings. The appearance was more than enough to bring fear to those that need feared. His reason for wearing it was the large amount of humans he could sense in the building. It wouldn't do him any good if they could identify him afterwards. His attention was quickly drawn to a man exiting the church and leaning against the wall. He noticed that he was wearing a trench coat similar to the other fallen he'd fought. If Isato's memory serves me right, he was the one sent to kidnap Minami. He will know where she is being kept. Hopefully I'm not too late. He was forced to move suddenly when 3 light spears impacted the branch he was sat on. He landed in front of the fallen angel. "You know, people like me don't like being stared at. It's rude, you know," he said, looking at the person in front of him. It wasn't until he looked at his hair did he realize who it was, and with a cold smirk he spoke. "So, you killed Hisato and Tessai." It was more a statement than a question. "He good. Now I know you're worth my time," he stated coldly, taking a step forward, bringing his fingers to his mouth, and whistled. Moments later, a priest came out the door. "Tell Nagasama that the target has found us. I will be handling it. We don't want to anger him too much while he's interrogating our prisoner," he ordered, taking care to look at Naruto when he mentioned prisoner in order to see what Naruto would do, and was rewarded with sight of his sword forming in his hand. He turned to the priest. "Go. I can handle him," he nodded and ran into the church. Niso turned to Naruto, about to taunt him when he was hooked in the face, sending him through the wall. Calmly picking himself up from the rubble, he grinned maliciously at the blonde walking through the hole he made. "This is it. Make me feel alive, Gremory." He followed his yell with barrage of crude-looking light spears from his sleeves, laughing madly as Naruto weaved in between until he dropped a smoke bomb and disappeared from sight. This made Niso more than a little mad. "Is hiding the best you can do, coward?" he yelled in frustration, trying to taunt the masked man into showing himself when he smiled cruelly. "Your little friend doesn't have much time left. When Nagas hears that you're here, he may not feel like holding back on her. Such a fragile thing, humans. I swear I heard a rib break under my fist." He stopped when a blue fireball shaped like a dragon's maw was launched at him from his left. The heat produced was eating away the walls in its vicinity as it traveled towards the fallen angel, who had snapped out of his surprise at the flame before spreading his wings to dodge to the right, only to form a large spear to block a sword strike from Naruto. But his spear shattered on impact as the sword finished its intended path, slicing across his chest, followed up with a knee to the kidney, letting him stumble back further into the church. He speaks. "Where is she?" His voice is warped and deeper, like there was another voice speaking just out of sync with his own. To anyone else it would have frozen them in place, but the dark chuckle from the fallen said otherwise. "Wouldn't Pant you like to know?" he answered, wiping the blood seeping from his mouth with the same evil smile stuck on his face as he formed more spears, but wasn't able to do much else before Naruto sprang into action. "Answer me." With a yell, Niso was launched through the wall behind him into a support pillar of the common room. Most of the human followers were resting or relaxing at the time until Niso came through the wall, looking more than a little beaten. They turned their gaze to the hole, and many were terrified of what emerged as a man garbed in black with a demonic skull-like mask that only exposed his hair and glowing blue slit eyes. As he walked over to them, he was stopped by a spear thrown to his feet. He looked over to Niso, now standing, although barely, as the blood loss from his chest wound was beginning to affect him. "You're not going anywhere. I still have to pay you back for my new scar. Pant, come on, you bastard, I'm not done yet." He began throwing spears of light with his left hand as he used his wings to rush at the blonde with a sword in his right. Their clash of swords was bloody and fierce, as priests would attempt to interfere, only to get cut down by Naruto and Nisso alike. As they continued, more and more injuries appeared over Nisso's body as he swung and countered with reckless abandon. His style of fighting explained the grotesque number of scars over his body, as any opportunity to strike was exploited regardless of his safety, but his efforts were for naught as he had yet to land a hit in the blur of steel, and light as wounds finally caught up with him. He slipped up as his sword broke from loss of concentration, as he collapsed from blood loss right into Naruto's swing, cutting deeply into his abdomen. "He is in the chamber down the hall," he spoke weakly as he grabbed Naruto's blade to keep himself up. Naruto nodded his thanks, but he was grabbed by the shoulder before he could move. "I want to know the name of my better Kuoh as you already know mine. It is only right that I know yours." He strained as darkness closed in. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," he replied in a stoic voice, not revealing any emotion. As he stared into the eyes of the dying man wedged on his sword, Nisso smiled. "I will remember that, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," he whispered as the life left his eyes and his body fell limply to the cracked tiles below him. Taking a moment to pay his respects, he looked around and saw the remaining priests were readying their weapons when he spotted the messenger from earlier standing at the back. It appears he stayed to watch the fight instead of warning his leader. Good, he thought, I might still have a chance. He glared at the group blocking his path. "For assisting in the harm of an innocent, you will die by my blade." His voice like that of a god, stating a fact than a threat. The armed priests charged him foolish. He muttered and joined the mass of flesh and steel. It was when the blood and screams started the messenger began to run again, stumbling in fear, making his way to where he believed to be a sanctuary, so long as he made it in time. Now, in Tetsuyuki's chamber, the poor messenger was turning blue at this point as the grip around his neck got tighter and tighter like a vice. As he relayed what had happened, if looks could kill, he would have been a pile of ashes by now, but a few feet away from him. Minami had another look in her eyes, a look of hope even through the biting pain of the sub-zero daggers, pining her to the chair. She had hoped that she would be saved. He threw the half-strangled man to the ground. "You fool. If you hadn't been so useless, I could have dealt with him before he got here," he bellowed as the door exploded in blue flames, drawing the attention of all the room's occupants. As they watched the intimidating figure of the Anbu walking through the burning doorframe, he glanced around the room, scanning, taking in as much information as he could, not staring at any particular place for more than a second, which seemed to piss off one person in particular. How dare you come into my house and not so much as look me in the eye," he growled out, flaring his power wildly, causing frost to spread wildly across the ground. "Do you have any idea who you are messing with, you devil scum?" yelled the enraged Tetsuyuki as the tension between the angered fallen and the silent hero. Minami was looking at Naruto in shock as her mind went a mile a minute with questions and thoughts on how the kind and considerate guy she had been saved by, talked to and cried on was now the imposing figure in the doorway who had fraud and killed in order to save her. It was surreal to her. This is some shit you see happen in movies, not in real life, and certainly not to yourself, she thought, bringing her attention to her now unresponsive legs and arm. She started to panic as her heartbeat rose and adrenaline surged through her body. She was beginning to go into a panic attack when she heard a voice that cut through the fear in her heart as she focused solely on the no longer silent savior. "Minami, don't worry, I won't allow my friends to die. I'll protect you with my life. Trust me," he spoke softly as the warp in his voice disappeared as his eyes softened. She could only see one emotion in those deep pools of liquid sapphire: confidence. An unshattering wrought iron will to take on all obstacles, even the biblical God himself. If it meant he could protect those precious to him, it was almost overwhelming. But she found comfort in it as she smiled to him. As tears threatened to fall, she felt at ease, and as she felt a wave of fatigue claiming her mind and body, she kept smiling. As the darkness took her, she whispered, "Thank you," lolling her head forward unconscious. Another fight scene, and as warned before, this will be hit and miss as it is new to me. Casting one more glance at Minami, his gaze hardened as he looked at Tetsuyuki. "You will not live through this, Nagas," he stated, opting to use Tetsuyuki's surname, flaring his chakra in preparation of the fight to come, matching Nagas's in strength. "I will not be defeated by a low-life devil, especially one related to those bastard Gremories," he bellowed, creating his signature ice daggers. The daggers themselves were designed as miniature rapiers 40 centimeters in length that excel at piercing like senbon into muscle groups, but also causing frostbite deep in the wound, making it a dangerous weapon to underestimate. Likewise, Naruto readied his blade for the exchange to come. He needn't wait long as it seemed Nagas was not the patient type. He flash froze the ground and jagged spikes erupted out in an attempt to spear Naruto, but he jumped out of the way, launching a small barrage of blue fireballs at Nagas, melting the ice in the process. He wing dashed above the fire straight at Naruto. With a swing of his arms, he launched several daggers trying to box Naruto in as he went for the kill, only to find that his target was now a blade-riddled log. His eyes widened when he saw the remaining ice spikes turning into a swarm of swallows before rushing at him with surprising speed. Thinking quickly, he threw his hands in front of him as a wall of ice blades bursting forth to protect him from the upcoming attack. The swallows impacted with the wall with an explosion of shrapnel blocking the view for a few moments. Behind the wall, the fallen angel stared at the large amount of damage his defense suffered, but was still standing with a grin. He yelled, "You're going to have to do better than that to beat me, devil." His taunt was met by silence, then the sound of rushing wind as a powerful gust shattered the remaining wall, forcing him to hold his arms in front of his face as his own ice blades were used against him. On instinct he summoned another dagger to his hand to block a strike from Naruto's blade, both pushing against the other as their power grew to new heights, oblivious to the beacon they'd created for a tiny figure a mile away. 1 mile from the church, flying lazily through the air was a small glowing green figure. The figure had a tuft of green hair with one horn in the center with strange triangle-shaped eyes. The little figure was in fact a familiar that Kuoh had sent after Naruto. Although she didn't know who he was, she had ordered the tiny demon to scout out any information on the large surge of energy that appeared a day ago. But so far all it had discovered was stories from fishermen of a fearsome hurricane that appeared for a few seconds, then vanished without a trace. With its only lead being the signature of energy used, it won't be able to find it unless there was another surge, and as the familiar was grumbling in gibberish about the punishment his master will give him, he suddenly sensed 2 medium-level energy sources. The first was unknown, but the second matched the signature it had found. It seemed that it had the devil's luck today. The tiny demon quickly flew towards it, hoping to complete its mission for his master, or suffer the punishment. Shivering at the thought it flew quicker, he really hated whips. Back at the church, DRAHH. He yelled as he cast another wave of ice spears as they sprung up from the frozen ground, following the ever-agile sage as he ran around dodging the spears, launching kunai and shuriken as a distraction to get in close, entering another long exchange of blades as they attacked and countered each other. Although from the state of the combatants, it was easy to tell that Nagas was losing. If it wasn't for the fact that he kept covering his wounds in ice, he would have bled out long ago, as it had been 20 minutes since they started and fatigue was setting in for the fallen angel. A short exchange of sword and dagger ended as both fighters jumped back, one panting heavily, drenched in slowly freezing sweat, and the other remaining silent since the start of the fight until now. "That's Ayuki Nagas. This is where it ends," he spoke as the temperature in the room rose to the point where the once frozen ground turned to water. The confusion on Nagas's face at the sudden change quickly became one of realization as he noticed the blood pooling around his feet. The ice that once kept it at bay had started to melt. He fell to his knees as his blood kept flowing, rich with his life as it pooled around him. The deja vu was almost too much to bear. He feared it would be the same as last time, the same look of disappointment on his face, and against his better judgment, he looked up to the man who brought him to his knees for the second time in his life and couldn't understand what he saw. Instead of disappointment, he saw in those fearsome blue eyes the sorrow and grief of what he had done. There was still anger at what he had done to the woman, but it was overshadowed by the other emotions present in those orbs. He could only voice one word: why. He spoke with as much strength he could muster as he rolled to his back, staring up at the dawn sky as the sun had just peeked over the horizon. "Why? Did you lose?" He finished his question. "It's because you couldn't let go. Hatred and revenge, although seemingly good motivators, only blind you to the lights in your life. The people who you could have called precious were cast aside, and you were left without those lights to guide you to greater heights. I had a friend like you. He was driven by revenge and ended up sacrificing everything to achieve it, and he lost those lights and was left in the dark to his weakness. He grabbed onto power that was given to him, but still was left weak." He paused and turned from the view of the sky to look into his eyes. "You had a powerful gift and had people to help you grow stronger, but let your ego and status overestimate your own ability. A wise person once told me that we only have true strength when we have someone to protect, someone to grow stronger for, but you threw that and your life away." He turned and walked towards the sill, unconscious Minami, leaving the dying full into his thoughts. Making a hand sign, a thin blue barrier became visible and then shattered. He had placed that barrier around her when he had distracted Nagas during the battle to protect her from any of their attacks. Putting his hand on a dagger, he pulsed fire chakra to it, causing it to melt. He repeated it 2 more times before ripping the restraints off and carefully picking her up from the chair to carry her bridal style. He began walking out of the chamber to leave the dying fool into his final moments alone when he heard a whisper, "Thank you." His final words, those not of hate but of gratitude, as he looked over his life and realized he had given up so much for so little in return, but still died with a smile on his face before bursting into flames, becoming nothing more than ash. Saying a small prayer, he left the building and every corpse past disappeared in the same manner, not once disturbing the woman in his arms. He made it out the front door as she finally stirred and awoke for but a moment as they both gazed at the sun rising in front of them. Minami looked up to the man who saved her, noticing how his hair and eyes seemed to glow in the sun's radiance. As she saw the single tear fall from his eyes, she hugged him tightly before falling into blissful sleep. Naruto himself could only smile at the woman. She would try to be a hard ass at times, but she was just as soft as he was when it mattered. walking off in the direction of the bar as the sun continued to shine over the city as businessmen and women began making their way tiredly to work. They never noticed the tiny figure flying high above following a blonde-haired man down the street with a woman in his arms. At McGinty's bar, Naruto had just entered through the front door of the bar and went to lay Minami on the couch he'd seen near the countertop. As he was laying down the injured woman, she began to stir, and looking around in confusion, she decided to voice her thoughts. "Why am I here? I need to get to the hospital," her voice still showing signs of exhaustion as she looked at Naruto approaching her. His response was chilled her. They wouldn't be able to do anything. The weapon used to inflict the damage severed major muscle groups in your arms and legs, and while that in itself would heal over a long period of recovery, it wasn't the only thing those daggers did to you. He paused, letting the seriousness of her situation settle in. The sub-zero temperature of the knives also created a dangerous amount of frostbite in the wounds, as well as crystallizing the tissue. "I'm afraid if you went to the hospital, the best they could do is amputation." His soft voice echoed in her mind as her eyes glistened with tears threatening to fall. She felt a hand caress her cheek. Following the hand, she saw it was Naruto smiling at her with a knowing smile. "And that's why I will be healing you instead." He chuckled at the shock on her face. "As you know, I'm not what you would call normal. I won't hide that from you, Minami. I have the ability to do things many may see as supernatural. Had you not been kidnapped, I would have continued to hide that fact until I knew I could trust you with my secret." He looked her in the eye as he spoke. "I will need to use my unique abilities to heal you, which may expose myself to other people like the apparent fallen angel, your kidnapper. I only ask that you don't tell anyone of my existence." He finished waiting for her answer. After a moment she asked, "Why? Why do all this for me? We only met yesterday and you've saved me twice, and without needing to you offered to heal me. Why?" She questioned. It was strange that a stranger would do so much for nothing in return. "I'm doing it because you are my friend, Minami. I would go against the gods themselves and win if it meant that I could protect what is precious to me." He answered with that same voice he had comforted her with back at the church, the iron will to face impossible odds. It was calming to her, knowing that she could believe in him. He had already proved it before. She had no doubt in what he said. Her inner dialogue was cut short when Naruto continued that, "And I don't think the medical bill will be a welcome sight to you either." He spoke teasingly, dodging the weak punch of her good arm. She muttered with a small smile, "Okay, now the healing process might be uncomfortable." "You mean painful?" she interrupted with a hint of worry in her deadpan voice. "No, not painful, as I will be numbing the area as I work. You should be glad he didn't sever any nerves, otherwise it would be quite a painful process." He spoke, igniting his hand in green flame. "Now I need you to lay still while I heal you. This may take a while," he informed her, getting nod in return as she shuffled on the couch to get comfy. "Alright, let's begin," he stated as he began healing her arm wound first. The process was quite complicated as the ice crystals that formed in her tissue have essentially punctured her cells, but it hasn't melted yet, which means it is possible to heal the cells by simultaneously melting the ice and closing up the cell itself. Then once that is done, he can reattach the muscles that are severed and seal up the wound. It will take a while for her to get back on her feet since physical therapy is part of the healing process. He had gained a large amount of respect for Tsunade and Shizune. Doing what they did for so long, it was something he wanted after the war. He was known for his power and strength, but it didn't mean anything to him. The death and destruction was a daily occurrence. He was determined to not let Tsunade's teachings be forgotten by time, and his determination only increased when he was able to save a young girl from having to live her life as an amputee. It was a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced when that little girl was able to run up to her mother and give her a hug with all the strength her healed limbs could muster as she cried in joy. Sure, it had taken him a few decades to achieve a level that he was sure Tsunade would be proud of, but the knowing he now had the ability to save lives instead of taking them, to him it was priceless. As Naruto was in his own little world, Minami was looking in fascination at the sight of her wounds healing as the green flame hovered over her wounds, and it was quite the strange feeling. It was like tiny phantom hands sewing her wounds together. Thinking back over the last 24 hours, she couldn't really believe how her life had taken such a drastic turn. She was a depressed bar owner who had been drugged and taken advantage of with the threat of being killed in an alleyway, but was saved by a complete stranger who then went and helped her get over her depression with but a few words. She was then taken hostage and tortured for information on said savior, only to be rescued by him a second time. As she thought on that, though, she realized that he had to kill so many people to get to her. She looked at his face. It was strange to think such a caring person could kill another. He wasn't heartless. She knew that the tear she saw him shed as they left that place was proof enough that he didn't like to kill. She must have been staring longer than she thought as Naruto spoke up. "Is there something on my face?" he inquired jokingly, still concentrating as he began on the second wound. "I was wondering how you do it. Take another life, I mean. I know you don't like killing. I saw your tear, but you did." And fumbling for the right thing to say, Naruto finished her question. He wondered how it felt to take a life. He spoke in his naturally calming voice, not showing that he minded the question or not. She nodded, a little shy as the question was kind of personal. Well, to start, you are right, I don't like to kill, I detest killing needlessly, but where I'm from it was the way of life to be trained from a young age to protect your village, no matter what and by any means necessary. I didn't mean we always killed others, but it was always an option when engaging the enemy. If it meant the difference between saving your comrade or letting him die, you did what you thought was right. His voice grim as he spoke of how it used to be in his world with constant fighting and deaths of both the guilty and innocent. It was a terrible place. He smiled a little at the memory of the people who had supported him in bringing peace to the world after the war, but shook his head of the memories to continue talking. Taking a life is something I hope you never have to experience. My first kill felt as if I had fell through the earth into a dark void, completely numb to my surroundings as the life left his eyes. I didn't make a sound afterwards, I just left to go back to camp, and after I made it to my tent I broke down. It was a terrible feeling. I felt like I had become less than human for killing even if he was a criminal. A piece of my soul ripped off and set ablaze for the act of taking another's life, but it's a part of our life. I knew that I would have to do it again to protect those I found precious. Minami just laid there and listened to him, noticing that his eyes that had been quite hollow looking gained a spark of its usual joy and care. I was pretty depressed after that, but my old teacher told me something I'll never forget. He told me that we kill others for the purpose of making sure that no harm comes to the innocent. If we had let them live, they might have continued to kill fathers, mothers and children, pillaging towns and raping women. Could you forgive yourself knowing that you had the power to save them? Knowing that taking one life could save the lives of many, he said, turning to look into her eyes. I fight to protect those that can't protect themselves. If I have the strength to do something for the greater good of those I care for, then you can bet I will do so to my last breath if needed. That's a promise, and if there's one thing that Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze doesn't go back on is a promise. He finished with his signature foxy grin, and despite the grim topic moments ago, Minami couldn't help but smile as well. Outside the bar, the tiny demon had followed the two back to the bar, hoping to get all the information it could, and was currently sat on a tree branch just outside in one of the decorative trees placed on the sidewalk, using its abilities to listen in on its target, but for some reason it couldn't hear them, which it found more interesting than annoying, as not many beings could cancel out its powers completely like that. This definitely required further investigation. Back inside, the comfortable silence had come over the two inside the bar. As Naruto finished up the last wound, he stood up from his place, kneeling on the ground and stretched. "So I'm good as new, doc?" Minami asked jokingly as she gave her healed arm a small test, only to wince after moving too quick. "Your wounds are fully healed if that's what you're asking, but you will still need a little physical therapy to get your mind used to moving again. It will be about 5 days before you will be back at full health," he informed her. "But what about the bar? I still need to run it. How am I going to get around or feed myself?" she exclaimed her thoughts. "I will be taking care of that, so don't worry, I will work the bar and take care of you until you can move again," he reassured her, only to receive a concerned look. "Are you sure? You've already done so much for me, you don't need to." She was stopped as Naruto pinched her lips together. Now, none of that. I'm happy to help. All you need to do, my cute little patient, is let me do the work while you take a load off. Now why don't you get some sleep? I'll wake you when I have dinner ready." Minami just nodded and rolled over, falling asleep moments later as Naruto went into another room. Naruto smiled, placing a blanket he had found over the sleeping girl. Standing up, he vanished in a swirl of leaves before reappearing behind a shocked familiar. Grabbing the tiny demon, he brought it up to his face with a stern expression. "You know it's quite rude to spy on people. Now I would appreciate you telling me why you are following me and who sent you," he asked. The small creature wasn't as forthcoming as he had hoped. He sighed. "Look, I'm not going to hurt you or whoever sent you so long as you do not attack me, okay?" he reassured the green spite, opening his hand, allowing it to stand on his palm. "How about we start over? I'm Naruto Uzumaki. What is your name?" he asked, extending his finger for it to shake, which it did, speaking in what most would consider high-pitched gibberish, but to some made perfect sense, Naruto being one of them. Was I little amused at the name for the tiny being. "So your name's Koda?" The little being nodded. "Okay, how about you tell me why you're here?" The tiny demon just pointed at him. "You're here because of me, why?" he asked, and listened to Koda's story of how its master had been ordered by her king to look into a surge of energy that appeared near the ocean, which led to it finding Naruto. "So you're here to learn about me and return with your findings?" Koda nodded, wondering why the blonde had a mischievous smile growing on his face. "How about a deal? I need to stay here and look after my friend and make sure she will recover properly, which will take a week." Koda nodded, growing a little wary of the large smile now present. "Good, when that time is over I will have a free schedule, so why don't you take me to your master so I can meet her?" Koda, catching on to what he was saying, knew it would be pretty funny, but it was not entirely convinced, stating its thoughts. Naruto nodded. "Okay, during the week, I will answer any question you ask, as long as it's not too probing, but you will have to explain the whole fallen angel thing to me, because I know there's more to it than what I saw last night." Koda thought over it for a minute before nodding. "Great. I look forward to getting to know you better, Kota, Naruto said chirpily as he handed it a small candy to which it shoved in its mouth, greedily comically extending its cheek as it perched itself in Naruto's hair as the sage made his way back inside. 1 week later, over the week Naruto and Kota had grown as friends as they exchanged information. It was nothing serious as Naruto asked, it had only been simple stuff like his name, age, favorite food. Okay, he got off topic, but info was info, didn't matter the kind, and in return Naruto learned of the factions, some of their history without going into specifics, the war and the current if but a little shaky peace that all factions have been enjoying over the last few decades. He was a little curious about his statement of king when he explained why he was here and learned of the evil peace system which interested him greatly. He really couldn't wait to talk to this king. Rias, he remembered being her name. Yes, it would be fun. Naruto was currently making lunch for himself and Minami. She wasn't happy to hear he would be leaving, which got a chuckle from him. For someone who kept up the tomboyish personality, she could be quite a softie at times. He walked into the main room where he saw Minami and Kota sitting at one of the tables as she fed him some candy. That was another thing, it appeared she had become quite attached to the little guy as well, and it hurt to leave. It was like taking a little girl's stuffed toy away and setting it on fire, but at least she understood why he had to go. Lunch was a quiet affair, there was no need for small talk or parting words, it could wait, right now they were just enjoying each other's presence. Near the end of the meal it was Naruto that spoke first. "You're sulking," his short statement got the desired response. "I'm not sulking," she defended in a childish manner, looking away from the blonde. "Yes you are, you made the same face when I first told you I was leaving," he stated. "If I didn't know better, I'd think your teddy bear was stolen," he teased as she shot him a playful glare, causing him to chuckle as he looked at the clock. Taking note of the time, he stood up, urging the others to do the same. He walked over to the backpack he had filled with a few supplies he would need in this world. Placing it on his back, he walked to the door as Kota floated behind them. "I'll see you around, Minami, keep safe, yeah?" He spoke offhandedly, waving behind him. Put was stopped at the door by a pair of slender arms hugging him from behind. He smiled before saying, "So this is what deja vu feels like." His attempt to lighten the mood was stopped when the young woman hugging him began to shake in an attempt to hide her sobs. He managed to hear a muffled baka from her. Smiling in a caring way, almost like a brother would to his little sister, as he turned around in her arms to return the hug as he spoke, "This isn't goodbye forever, you know, you're the only family I've got, nah." Amado, he told her. She froze at the title before she hugged him tighter as she started crying again. "Hi Niacin," she said with a smile. The feeling of having a family again warmed her soul, which reflected in her eyes as she looked at the blonde. "I will visit as much as I can, nah," he told her, kissing her on the forehead as he turned to walk out the door. He and Kota were only a few feet away from the door when they heard a voice. "Naruto, wait." He turned to see Minami running up to him with a small box in her hands. She panted a bit before giving him the gift. He raised an eyebrow at the item. "Since I have a brother now, it wouldn't be right if you didn't have your own," she told him. "My own what?" He looked over the box, about the size of a shoebox, but made out of sturdy wood with leather accents. Just like the inside of the bar, it was held shut with a worn iron latch. "It's a family tradition to have these, something to do with my father's old profession. Before he settled down I haven't opened mine, but he had a spare. I think he knew you would be coming," she explained as she ran back to the bar with a wave. "That was a little weird, what do you think, Kota?" he asked, looking up to the familiar resting in his hair. He grinned at the response. "You know, I think so too." Opening the box as he walked, the contents only made his grin widen. "This is going to be very interesting," he spoke to himself as he walked into the horizon towards Kuoh Academy and a certain crimson-haired mistress. It had been a day since his departure from McGinty's bar and his first precious person in this new world, and he had to admit it was a nice feeling to have someone to care for again. It had been close to a century since he last formed a bond like that. He had decided after his last friend passed away it was time to live in isolation for a while, to travel the lands and refine his skills to their peak. A large portion of his time was dedicated to senjutsu, to truly master the art in ways even the Toad elders couldn't imagine. Regardless, he had been far too lonely for his liking, and the change was welcome. Speaking of company, the tiny familiar currently perched in his hair was something that interested him, as the concept was quite similar to summoning from what he'd learned from his little friend. He was brought out of his thoughts by a tug on his hair, followed by a high-pitched voice. "So we're nearly there." Receiving a nod from Kota, Naruto looked at the horizon and saw the buildings he had come to identify with a city. "It's about time. I've been running for a while now," he spoke to himself as he sped up a little, but not too much. No need to signal his arrival prematurely. Moments later, the people of Kuoh were going about their day, oblivious to the high-pitched screaming of a tiny green demon or the blonde man blurring through the streets he was holding on to for dear life. To anyone capable of seeing them, it was a funny sight to behold. Naruto had finally slowed down just outside the Academy of Kuoh to let his passenger catch his breath, which he quickly used to yell at the laughing blonde who, upon seeing the appearance of the poor familiar, couldn't keep his composure. The unfortunate familiar was covered in splattered bugs, and his hair was swept straight back in a cartoonish fashion. A weak water jutsu and a comb later, the two snuck up to the open window of the Occult Research Club, and peering in they saw their targets, and luckily both were completely obliviously to their surroundings, a perfect opportunity. Inside the clubroom, the Crimson Beauty currently sitting on the couch facing away from the window, was one Rias Gremory, the heiress to the Gremory clan of the Devil faction, a prestigious title for someone who was lost in her own world, reading her favorite manga, with a small smile on her fair-skinned face. On the couch opposite the Redeed was an equally beautiful raven-haired woman humming to herself as she weaves together a leather whip. Ignoring that it appeared that she was daydreaming about something sadistic in nature, but otherwise she was also oblivious to the random encounter about to take place. Back at the window, Naruto was a little disappointed at how lax the heiress was with keeping her guard up, but he had to remember that this wasn't the ninja world where assassinations were a common problem to deal with. Still, she shouldn't just assume her title will keep people from trying. Maybe my little introduction will be a lesson. Using his immense stealth and suppression skills, he was able to make his way to the spot on the couch across from Rias and one cushion over from Akeno without alerting the two, although it wasn't all that hard to sneak up on distracted teenagers, but all the same. The blonde was just sat patiently waiting for the right moment, and a minute later it appeared with Rias. Akeno, could you pour me a cup of tea please? She spoke, not once taking her eyes off her manga, and was none the wiser when tea was placed in front of her moments later. Thank you. Grabbing the cup she took a sip as she closed her eyes, enjoying the aromatic liquid before responding with a sigh. Good tea. As always Akeno, she continued to caress the cup in her hands, not expecting the voice of a male to respond. I'm not Akeno, but you're welcome. Slurp. I do admit this tea is quite good. The sudden realization that the two were not alone finally caught up, and with a startled look both women looked at the uninvited guest, who was sitting with one leg crossed over the other, holding his cup on his lap. Being the first to regain her thoughts, Rias spoke. I take it since you haven't attacked us you aren't here for hostile reasons, so the question is why you are here, came her calm response, trying not to show weakness in front of the man before her, but on the inside, it was a little scared on how easily he snuck up on Akeno and her. Naruto was impressed at her calm and composed expression, but it was obvious to him that she was scared, if only a little. Rias Gremory, I am here in response to your request to have a meeting. His tone professional as he stated his reason. The Redeed was racking her brain trying to remember if she had set up a meeting beforehand and just forgotten about it, but came up empty. I'm sorry, but I don't remember requesting your presence, she replied. Oh? I had the feeling you wanted to speak with me after I received your messenger, he stated as Kota appeared from his hair. Do you remember now, Rias-san? You sent this little guy to search for me. I had assumed you wanted to meet, he stated airily, watching as she connected the dots. Who are you? The only reason you were contacted by this familiar is because you were the source of an energy surge little over a week ago. I know all devils capable of such a feat of power, and you are not one of them. Rias voiced with a little concerned as she was face to face with an unknown who could potentially outmatch a high-class devil, of which she herself is counted among, although not as experienced. You want to know who I am? His voice serious as he looked down, allowing his fringe to cover his eyes. Alright, I'll tell you, I am Pufu. He said in a childish tone, transforming into a perfect replica of Rias, including her voice. Meanwhile Rias, who had been leaning forward in order to hear him, had face faulted at the stunt. Ha. That was worth a trip here, I haven't pulled a prank in ages. Naruto spoke still in Rias' voice as the real one got back on the coach. Meanwhile Akeno was just staring at the two in shock. It wasn't every day you see a male turn into a perfect replica of your best friend. That doesn't mean she didn't laugh at her reaction, though king or not it was still funny, this of course earning her a glare from said Redeed. Jokes aside, you still haven't told me who you are, she said sternly, trying to get the conversation going again and away from the embarrassing moment that had occurred. Reverting back to his original form, Naruto replied, yeah, sorry, I couldn't help myself. I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and the reason you haven't heard of me in your devil hierarchy is because I'm not a devil to begin with. Although a little surprised by that tidbit, she continued, if you aren't a devil then which faction do you serve? She was beginning to get nervous because she wasn't so sure she could win in the small room against a high-class angel. Fallen or otherwise, light weapons are a major advantage indoors. Neither, I am human, I assure you, just not a civilian, he said, leaning forward. He got into what his friends dubbed his Hokage mode, for the serious and commanding tone he spoke with made almost anyone who heard it do what was asked of them, whether out of fear or respect no one knew. I am about to disclose important information to you and your queen that could paint a large target on my back if it gets out to certain individuals. Now do I have your full attention, as I will not be repeating it? Both devils nodded with a serious air now falling over the two. I am the last remnant of a culture breed in combat with abilities to shape the elements themselves, create oceans out of the air itself or great forest with only a thought, but peace has let those abilities and teachings fade into myth and legend. He paused, giving thought to what he was going to say next. He hated politics, but he needed to do this, and if what Kota said was true, then the Gremory house was a good ally to have. He paused here, letting the information sink in before continuing. If certain factions or other unpleasant people were to discover certain aspects of my power, it could turn quite ugly very quickly, and before you ask, I cannot tell what all my abilities entail, but as a token of trust, I will show you that I'm not just stringing you along. But that statement, he held his hand up and in its palm a ball of intense blue flame manifested. Both devils were quite surprised at how much heat, no not heat, it was warmth the flame was emitting as small as it was, but Rias found it somewhat familiar to her own ability, but it felt alive almost with an aura she couldn't quite place. Shaking her head, she made a mental note to look into it later. As the flame disappeared, Kuoh spoke first. Why are you telling us this? We could turn against you or sell you out to other people. How can you trust people you've just met like this? She asked because of the telltale look of deep thought visible on her king's face, meaning she had something in mind. Naruto smiled warmly at her. I can trust you because I can sense negative emotions in others, and neither of you had any present during our conversation. Well, that and I've always trusted others easily, but it usually works out in the end. Regardless, he shrugged. His trust wasn't naively placed anymore, but it was still given on gut feelings, and he had a good feeling about these two. The Crimson Princess spoke up. Well, this is indeed interesting information, but I'm assuming that you want something in return for this token of trust, her sharp mind picking up on his intentions. You are correct. In return for a friendly relation between me and your peerage, I would like to offer my help to you in return for admittance to this school, as I have very little knowledge of this world and its people outside my own, so what do you say? We get to be friends and I go through school under your vigilance, he replied, extending his hand with his signature foxy grin, waiting on Ria's answer. There was a small pause before Rias looked up at Naruto, a small smile on her face as she shook his hand. I agree to your terms, Uzumaki-san, it will be a pleasure getting to know you. Likewise, but seeing as we are friends now, you can call me Naruto. I'm not one for formalities, he replied, finishing his tea. He placed the empty cup down before looking at the closed door of the room. It was nice meeting you too, but it appears that my time is up. Your peerage is approaching, and I'd rather not be seen by them just yet, he said, standing up and walking over to the window. I will take my leave, still got to find a job of some sort. That reminds me, Rias, do you happen to know a good publishing company? His question, although seemingly random to her, she answered regardless. I believe there is one in town, but I don't know the name. Sorry, I couldn't be more help. That's fine, it won't be much trouble finding it, I suspect. See you around, Rias, Kuoh and Kota, good luck, and with that he vanished in a flash of lightning, just as the remaining club members entered the room to see both their king and queen staring at the window. Good morning, Butchu, beautiful day we're having, Kiba greeted, entering the club room followed by Kaneko. Good morning was Kaneko's usual monotone greeting as she sat herself on her favorite spot on the couch, only to frown as she did. This didn't go unnoticed by those on the room. Is something wrong, Kaneko? Rias asked her, Rook realizing who had been sitting there just moments before. Someone sat in my spot. Her cute frown was mixed with confusion. Being a Nekashu, her sense of smell was quite acute, but she couldn't smell anything, which was odd. Not odd enough to mention, besides it would make her look weak if she couldn't detect someone. Ara, it would appear our guest has left an impression on our little Nico, a giggling Kuoh teased. Best? I wasn't aware of we were supposed to meet today, asked a confused Kiba, oblivious to the glaring girl beside him. There's no need to worry, Kiba-kun, it wasn't required for you to be there, it was just a friend popping in to have some tea, but he had something to take care of and couldn't stay long, Rias replied to the blonde knight, easing his confusion but bringing up more questions for both devils. But she was being vague, Kaneko stated, still annoyed at her spot being sat on. She wanted to know who it was. Anyone who has a spot on their couch will understand. He would like to keep himself secret for now, but will introduce himself to you in time. What I can tell you is that he is an ally with strength equal to my own. She spoke with authority, hinting that the discussion was finished. Now I have some work to do. You are free to go about your own activities until tonight, she informed them as she got up and walked into the back room with her queen following behind, closely covering her mouth in an attempt to stifle her laugh. It appears that Naruto managed to place a sign on Ria's back that read, I'm a tomato princess. Someone as strong as Butchu? I wonder who this person is. It wasn't a large group to pick from, and the thought of a devil with such strength was motivating. Kaneko, do you want to spar until Butchu gets back? The smiling blonde asked. Hi, let's go, she responded, walking outside with Kiba accompanying her. Inside the study, Rias was currently in her makeshift library looking through books on devil history, mythology from different eras and law, while her queen was making a few snacks with customary tea. An interesting person, wasn't he? Rias looked over to Kuoh, who had just entered the room with a tray of food and tea. Setting it to the side, she looked to her childhood friend. You're going to reincarnate him, aren't you? Rias just sighed, knowing it would be impossible to hide her intentions from her. I've considered the idea. It's not every day someone like him shows up claiming what he has, along with offering an alliance. True, it does seem a little hard to believe, but would it be possible to use the evil pieces on him? It may cost too many to perform the ritual, Akeno suggested, as the possibility was quite real, especially with more powerful beings, the cost was usually great in comparison to weaker ones. I know that, Akeno-chan, but that won't stop me from trying if he agrees to it. She began rifling through documents on her desk as she continued. First I have to get his enrollment to the school sorted, I don't know why, but I have good feeling about him, Rias responded with a smile at the thought of the mysterious man. I think Naruto-san is a good person if but a little bit of a prankster, the giggling Akeno said, pulling the sign off Ria's back before handing it to her. Rias was in shock and embarrassed, not noticing him place this on her back before. Akeno, how long has this been on me? She questioned the sweetly smiling woman. Oh, since we left the room, but you, she answered, pointing to her lip as she did, seemingly innocent. Hearing that, Rias deflated in her seat. I'm not a tomato, she pouted, arms crossed, causing Akeno to laugh a little. As her bout of laughter died down, she looked at the books on the desk, seeing that they weren't the norm for her friend to read. She raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Her silent question was answered by Rias. I have had something on my mind since he showed us that flame of his. It wasn't natural fire like the phoenix are able to use, it felt similar to my own power of destruction, but something was different. Did you feel anything from it, Akeno? The Redeed asked, trying to ascertain any kind of information on this new piece on her game board. I did, it was odd, like it was alive, but I'm not sure. Besides, there isn't a being that is completely made of fire, unless it was a sacred gear of sorts, the queen spoke, adding her thoughts. Normally I would agree, but I couldn't detect a gear in him like the others, which only leaves it being a natural ability of some type. The natural curiosity of the young Gremory, getting the best of her, she knew, would lead to a few long nights of research, with her newest ally being the center of it. Akeno, seeing that her king would be occupied for some time, she left to deal with something of her own and left the study to her bedroom. Entering it, she summoned Kota, who was quite pale for the usually green familiar, as he looked at the predatory gaze of its master. You have been quite naughty, haven't you, my pet, keeping away from me for a whole week. It hurt my feelings, you know. In a blur of movement, the tiny demon was restrained as the now leather-clad devil pulled out a box from the closet labeled whips. It's time for your punishment. The high-pitched cries of pain were heard by all who passed the academy, and one blonde-haired sage was saying a small prayer. Fallen comrade, better you than me, my friend. I'll bring him a treat next time I see him. A few days later, it had been a few days since his meeting with the young Gremory, and in that time Naruto had found a publisher for the books he had planned to sell, but to get some income flowing, he republished his godfather's first book, The Tale of a Gutsy Ninja. Needless to say, it was a hit with him, and the contract was a sure thing. With the cash received, he wanted to get a plot of land to build a house on, something similar to the house he had back in the Elemental Nations, and luckily for him there was an old woman with a large plot of land she had inherited from her mother, but couldn't take care of properly, hoping to sell for reasonable price. Quickly changing into a tasteful suit he had purchased earlier, he excitedly quickened his pace to the address at the edge of the town. A few moments later, arriving at the location, he was quite happy to see the large amount of nature thriving, as it was quite scarce in the city. He couldn't help but be in awe, as the beautiful vista of lush grass and trees swaying in the vast field full of flowers were almost glowing in the midday sun. Beautiful, isn't it? His reverie was broken by the aged female voice to his side as he glanced to his right to see the wrinkled features of the landowner. She looked up to him and smiled in a way only a kind grandmother could. Yes, it is quite the picture. I'm afraid I didn't catch your name, miss, he spoke kindly, extending his hand. I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, a pleasure to meet you, introducing himself with his foxy smile. Likewise, I'm Hiromi Kani, and as much as I like the view, we must get to business. I'm sure you have places to be, so if you'll follow me, we can get the paperwork and discussion out of the way. The blonde nodded his head in agreement as he followed the elderly woman along a path to a very ornate-looking house. Its intricate wood carvings along the support beams and the faded once deep green walls gave it a well-lived feel, quite fitting it seemed for the age of the woman he was following. Hiromi herself was around 1.5 meters in height with faded blue-gray hair tied, so the sides of her hair were braided to the back of her head like a headband. She was dressed in a faded yellow kimono and gray sash tied in a bow at the back. They arrived at the door and entered into the wooden house to the living room, where legal papers were placed on the coffee table. Hiromi sat on the couch, gesturing for Naruto to sit in the armchair to her left. Before we start, I have a question for you, Uzumaki-san, the old woman asked, her wise and face hardening for intimidation. I would like to know what you have planned for my land. This place holds a large part of my history here, and I just want something to give me peace of mind. Naruto is just fine, Hiromi, and to put you at ease, I'm not going to build a shopping mall on it if that's what you think. It's quite the opposite actually. All I want is to have a home for myself to enjoy the abundance of nature it contains, Naruto answered truthfully, knowing that it is difficult to let go of the past, hoping to put the woman at ease. Hiromi released a sigh of relief and was about to speak. The whistle of a kettle interrupted her. Oh, it appears the tea is ready. Would you like a cup, dear, she asked halfway to the kitchen. Yes please if you don't mind. She vanished through the doorway leaving him alone to look around the room, finding nothing that stood out until his gaze landed on an instrument in the corner shining in the light showing that it was well cleaned, even more so than its surroundings. His urges overcoming him he got up and walked over to it. The instrument was something he recognized from the music shop his clone had visited, but what caught his eye was how similar it was to an instrument he had used in his home. Although he hadn't seen one for years, it was nostalgic to see it in this world. The rattling of cups caught his attention as Hiromi entered the room again with a tray of tea. She saw what her guest had been admiring. It's a beautiful work of art isn't it? My mother used to play it when I was young sigh. But that was so long ago it has just been aging there ever since. She chuckled at how she used to be a sprightly young kid always on the move, but when her mother played it was like everything slowed down. You couldn't help but to just stop and listen to the serene sound. It certainly brings back memories. Do you still play? He asked wondering if she had taken up her mother's hobby. I used to, but in my old age my fingers have suffered and arthritis has made it impossible to play for me. She lamented over her lost joy in life. It would make my day to hear it played once more, but I'm afraid young people these days only go for guitars and the like. And may I? If you don't mind that is he asked gesturing to the instrument. She looked him in the eye for a while, as if looking for something before nodding her consent. Thank you. Naruto collected the violin from its tall wooden stand in the corner and getting into position sat in the armchair he began to play, and even with slight difference in design, he still hadn't lost his touch after all the years he spent practicing with various instruments he preferred string to brass, but that was neither here nor there. Song. Grandpa's Violin by Yuki Kajiro or any other heartfelt song you prefer. His hands moved with grace and purpose as he let instinct take control fueled by his emotion as he closed his eyes, the sound filling the room as it moved from a slow rhythm to a cheerful tempo. The world was forgotten to the two as the walls fell away and the sun illuminated the blonde like a spotlight. Hiromi could only look at the young man in shock. The sound she had grown up listening to was flowing once more. The emotion and soul-filled music was captivating, bringing forth memories of her life when her mother was alive, when they would sit on the porch and play for all outside to listen. For Naruto it was just a calm peaceful flow of his heart controlling his movements now. It was like being in a trance, reminiscent of when he trained to use nature energy. The almost overwhelming peace of body and soul, as his emotions were let loose through sound was uplifting as the music came to a gradual end. After he finished eyes still closed from his trance-like state he sat there a moment before looking to Hiromi who was wiping away tears. That was lovely dear, if I hadn't known better, I would have thought my mother was playing again. She spoke with a smile. Thank you for your kind words, but I'm sure she would be much better than me. He cleared his throat as he put the violin back. Now I believe we still need to get some paperwork done, so shall we crack on bringing the older woman back to the reason of their meet? Yes I suppose we should. She smiled softly at the young man. The two spent the better part of 2 hours signing things off and talking on and off topic until they had finished around 3 p.m. Well Hiromi-san, it was a pleasure meeting you. Naruto spoke as he was escorted to the door of Hiromi's house. I enjoyed the company also Naruto-san, she replied. We must do this again sometime and perhaps you could play for me again, she added, a light-hearted tone in her voice as she opened the door. I would like that Hiromi-san, I best be off before it gets too dark. He looking at the sky for a moment before walking down the worn path leading back to the property. Hiromi could only stare at the young man whose company she had thoroughly enjoyed. She couldn't help but smile in his presence like he just emitted positive emotions. What an interesting young man, she muttered to herself with a smile as she re-entered the house. Said blonde made his way into town to find a hotel to stay the night in and perhaps meditate on what he has learned of this new world so far and look into what he can learn from the fallen angel he used his human path on. It would be foolish not to take advantage of what he knew. Information was always important no matter where it came from. Moments later in the field, BTW, picture it being 50 acres or something close to that. Naruto stood in front of the property he had just purchased analyzing the lay of the land for his new home. The corners of his mouth perked up at that. It had been a while since he had a permanent place to call home. Not that he hated the role of a wandering sage, but it was just in his nature to have bonds and attachments to places and people. People might call it a weakness, but it was Naruto's strength, his double-edged sword, but he wouldn't have it any other way. The land before him was relatively flat with lush tree line around its border, with a small cluster of trees across the middle, hiding a majority of the lowered back half of the landscape from view, which worked in his favor for what he had planned, but he couldn't build without any materials, or workers for that matter. Naruto made his way to the concealed part of his property before clasping his hands in a modified prayer sign, letting his chakra surge through him. It was a feeling he couldn't help but sigh happily as gigantic trees burst forth from the ground in perfect rows, barely towering over the ones beside them. Now that's done, time for the workers, and on cue his temporary workforce was created in a small poof of smoke behind him, which quickly faded to reveal 20 copies of the blonde all standing to attention. It was something they picked up during the war and have done since then, but he wouldn't complain. It was nice to see that they respected him, even though they were him. He quickly moved from that odd thought. You guys know what to do and make sure 4 of you set up a genjutsu barrier. I don't need any civilians freaking out and directing attention our way. His orders accepted with a choir of high boss. As he made to walk off for another project he paused mid-step and looked seemingly off in space. It appears my other landlord wants to meet, he muttered thoughtfully as he felt Kuoh making his way towards him. Good afternoon Kuoh, I assume Rias would like to talk to me. He spoke just as the familiar appeared in front of him. With a nod from the tiny creature he continued walking with Kuoh perching itself on his head. In the occult research clubroom, currently the Gremory heiress was waiting for a certain blonde to show up as she had news regarding his request and she was hoping to get some more information from him, but she wouldn't push for it, she knew he would tell her in time. She was alone for the moment as her queen was out shopping. For what? She had learnt it was best not to ask. She may love her friend like family, but her kinks were a dangerous path to cross. Iridid looked to the clock on her desk with a sigh. I sent Kuoh out to fetch him 20 minutes ago. He should be here by now, the girl beginning to get a little impatient as she had finished her workload for the day and only waiting for the blonde to appear. The sound of a throat being cleared quickly drew her attention to the window and to her surprise Naruto was lounging in the window frame with a pad of paper and a pencil. Yo, and a non-committal wave was the greeting she received from the half-blonde. How long have you been there, Naruto-san, she asked with her usual calm voice, not the least bit annoyed by his tardiness, but underneath she was beginning to get annoyed at how easily he has been able to sneak up on her. She might not have the stealth skills of a Kuoh, but she was pretty decent at sensing a person's presence, but with him, it was like a mirage of some sort and kind of creepy actually. About 15 minutes, but you looked busy so I decided to wait here and draw a little to pass the time, his carefree response only getting a sigh from the tired Gremory. I didn't take you for an artist, Naruto-san. What have you drawn, if you don't mind me asking? She was generally interested since she might be able to find out more about her enigmatic friend. Well, you of course, his smile although genuine had something more to it, something she would learn to grow weary of as she learned about the blonde. I'm flattered, Naruto-san, may I see it? Her curiosity now piqued. Maybe after our meeting, unless you called me here just to chat, he none too subtle reminded the king the reason for his arrival. Yes, sorry, I have asked you here to tell you your request to attend Kuoh Academy has been accepted, she spoke calmly, slipping back into her role of king. There's a but in that sentence, isn't there, he interjected flatly. He could practically hear the word troublesome echo in his mind as Rias nodded happily to his question. Yes, in order for you to stay in my territory, you must bear my mark, that way anyone from the other factions will know not to attack you, well, at least not straight away, she informed the sage, laying the groundwork for her final offer, one she hoped would actually work. This mark of yours, Naruto began, it's not a slave mark from what I've seen of your peerage, so it must have a more practical use, correct? His question was expected, but the news of him spying on her peerage was a little unsettling, but she wouldn't let it show. Very astute of you, but yes, the mark of a devil house does not give us control over its receiver, but it does let us keep track of where you are or if you are injured, but it is mostly used to determine who your allegiance is tied to. It wasn't a lie, well for her at least she didn't know about the other houses, but the Gremory clan was one founded on love and compassion, every member by blood or peerage was family. Naruto, already knowing as much from his observations during the days before, answered, okay, I will accept your mark. Inside her head, Chibi Rias was waving a victory flag, but you will have to take mine in return, eh? This time she couldn't retain a straight face, being caught off guard by his statement. Yes, if we are to be allies then we both have to show our trust in one another, so if I have to bear your mark, you have to bear mine, his tone conveying he wasn't joking around as he walked over to her desk and extended his hand to her. You said you weren't a devil. It wasn't a question of his honesty, but genuine curiosity to know why a human would need a clan mark if it was anything like hers. I did, and you're right to be suspicious of me, but I can't trust you if you can't do the same for me. Think of it as a show of faith that when and if I'm needed I'll be there. In a flash his reasoning wasn't unjust, and he had the same intentions as Rias for the mark to make sure those under her care were safe. She knew she was trapped here. If she declined it made her seem untrustworthy, and he might leave to approach someone else, but if she accepted it meant she had a strong ally to aid her if she needed it. To her the pros were worth it. You have a deal, Naruto-san, I don't know why, but I trust you, she said, taking his hand before looking him in the eyes, a show of commitment the blonde was impressed by with one so young. I thank you for that. I know it's not easy to do so, but let's hope that an alliance such as this is not needed anytime soon, his response backed by experience. It was always useful to have allies to fight with you, but it's better to not have to fight at all. Rias then took her spare hand and placed her palm on the back of Naruto's hand, and he copied her movements as she began speaking. I, Rias Gremory, give this mark as proof of my allegiance and friendship to Naruto Uzumaki. He will always be welcome in Gremory territory. And with a flash of crimson the Gremory symbol appeared on his hand. Getting a nod from Rias, Naruto began his marking process. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, give this mark as proof of my alliance with the Gremory house and my friendship with Rias whenever she may need it. My door will be open, he spoke softly as a golden light shone underneath his hand as his family symbol appeared on her hand, which was the Uzushio swirl with 6 kunai blades spaced evenly around the edge. As they released each other's hand they both looked at the marks they had received. The Gremory's stylized rose was quite unique, but Rias was more transfixed on the symbol emblazoned with golden light, and although she was interested to research the symbol she couldn't get over how pure the energy contained in the mark felt. If not for the fact it wasn't harming her she would have sworn it was holy, but there was another feeling. Warm, she thought aloud before clearing her throat, a little embarrassed at the amused look she got from Naruto. Well, now that business is over, what you have been doing lately? Did find the publisher you were looking for? She asked, moving to sit behind her desk, possibly preparing herself for her peerage members to arrive. Yes, I did, thank you for asking. They were actually quite impressed with the story, and I managed to buy some land to make a home in. Returning to his spot on the window frame as he spoke. You must be quite the author to get a deal so quickly. Being an avid reader of manga, she had a decent idea of how the trade worked, as well as the successes and failures of new writers. I'm afraid the praise doesn't belong to me. The story was one my godfather wrote, his first work that was missed by almost everyone. His smile now bittersweet as memories came back to him, images of a man with wild spiky white hair, held back with a large metal plate with a kanji for oil carved into it, his face aged and wrinkled but so full of life. He missed him, he missed all of them. During the time he was lost in his memories the ruined princess was analyzing the blonde who now seemed far older than he appeared. Faint scars she hadn't noticed in their first encounter seemed all too noticeable now before her focus shifted to his eyes, which had lost some of their glow like deep wells someone had thrown a torch into before he broke out of his reverie, and the light reappeared. For what seemed to last hours but instead only mere seconds. His attention brought back to the conversation, he continued, I decided it was time he got the praise he deserved, so I had it republished in his honor. His smile brightened, thinking how Jiraiya would feel at being the first author to go interdimensional, probably would have complained that it wasn't Icha. What is the book about? She asked and watched as Naruto reached into his cloak and pull out a brown hardcover book with the title The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Ninja written on the front. He passed the book to Rias, who accepted it readily before flicking through the first few pages as Naruto spoke. It's about a ninja who has an unbreakable will, never giving up even in the face of overwhelming odds. He vows to break the curse and its vicious cycles of hatred, conflict and war that govern the ninja world, he explained to the read. It says the main character is called Naruto as well. Did he name it after you? Her question met with him tapping the side of his nose. She pouted a little at that. That would be telling now, wouldn't it? Besides, it appears our meeting is at an end. Her raised eyebrow. Her unasked question was answered by a transport symbol appearing to the left of Rias, signaling that Akeno had finished shopping. I'm back, but you, oh Naruto-san, you're here, what a surprise. She greeted the two with her usual smile that, depending on your view, was either kind or menacing. A small yawn alerted everyone bar Naruto to the green familiar emerging from his golden locks. It appears your hair is quite comfy, Naruto-san, her tone obviously a dangerous one for the poor creature as it quickly dispersed itself to avoid whatever punishment the devil was thinking of. Yes, sorry about that, he fell asleep on the way here. I didn't have the heart to kick him off, he told her, trying to cut Kota some slack. It was half his fault after all. Akeno merely waved it of it's alright Naruto-san, I was only scaring him. Would any of you like some tea or snacks? Yes, thank you Akeno, the raven-haired girl nodded to her king before looking to Naruto, who was looking a little sheepish. I'm sorry, but I have to go and check on how my house is coming along. Perhaps another time, he smiled apologetically before he walked to the window where picked up his pad of paper, subtly reminding the heiress of what he said earlier, before he disappeared in a shuncheon of harmless blue flames, leaving only a single sheet floating slowly to the ground. Iridi deftly caught the drawing before her queen, only to stop and stare at it in slight praise evident by her raised eyebrow. She had half expected to see a tomato on the parchment, but instead there was a delicately sketched and shaded portrait of Rias doing paperwork on her desk. Even Akeno, who had now peered over Ria's shoulder, was impressed at the mysterious blonde's talent before spotting the book she hadn't seen previously resting on top of some documents she assumed Rias had finished earlier. Did you try to reincarnate Naruto-san yet? Her question breaking the silence of the clubroom as she went into the small kitchenette to prepare for tonight. No, it was too soon to make that kind of request, but something else did happen. Once again staring at the back of her hand, and like magic the symbol lit up, although not as bright as before but still visible. You gave him your mark before taking him into the peerage. Was that wise? Her voice slightly muffled from the next room as the distinctive sound of a kettle boiling was heard. She knew that it was a not only arrogant but also a gamble for her to do, but she really didn't have a choice. He was still an unknown, and apart from some hobbies and his odd flame ability, she knew nothing about him. She didn't even know where he was living currently. We can only wait and see, tell me, have you seen this mark before? Raising her hand to show her friend, hoping she had some idea as to its origin, but hope was squashed as she shook her head negatively. No, I haven't, but where did it come from? Was it Naruto-san? Her fast deduction unsurprising to the young king, who merely nodded. Yes, it is his. A stipulation for his loyalty was that I bear his mark if he was to bear mine. It still felt his weird energy thrumming in the mark, but still lost as to its nature. You know, if anyone finds out about this it could cause problems. Her friend oddly serious now, and it wasn't hard to see why. The well-being of friends or family was always a serious matter. I know, Akeno, I know, though it wasn't said. She knew what her childhood friend was hinting at. Perhaps it could work in her favor, but now wasn't the time to think about it. Getting up from her chair, she walked off to her study with her queen following faithfully on her left. XXX. Back at the construction site. XXX. In a quick burst of azure flame, the blonde was standing in front of the foundations for his future home. Spotting a clone with a clipboard, he walked over to him to get a report. The clone, seeing him, did a quick salute. Yo boss, you're back. Didn't think you'd be back so soon. I had to cut the meeting short, otherwise her peerage would have seen me. Regardless, how is construction coming along? Did you finish the plans? I thought of curios as to what his clone accomplished while he was away. Naruto had noticed that his clones tended to sort themselves as leader and teammates, then to strategists. Due to an unusual variation in how they are produced, they are still clones and have equal amounts of chakra like the technique is designed to do, but the variation is in their mindsets. Some will be formed with a better ability to lead or strategize, while others are better at working in teams. As soon as they form, they immediately know which is which and organize themselves based on that, something Naruto has found to be extremely useful for projects such as these. Hi, I have a copy here and the original is with the strategists. Oh, and boss, the barrier team said there was unknown snooping around earlier, but they didn't have visual contact. He flicked through his clipboard before nodding to himself. Apart from that, the foundation is finished and the lumber clones are cutting the wood to size before moving on to fabrication. He saluted again before walking off. Happy with progress so far, he made his way to the back half of the property. He had a project of his own to get started on, but not before sending a squad of hinged clones to scout out the town. The next day, in the early morning hours, we find Rias staring intensely at her chessboard, seemingly lost in thought, a pair of glasses perched on her nose. The sight would have been odd to most, but it wasn't uncommon among the peerage to see her like this, but then again Naruto wasn't one of them. Said blonde was once again sat in the window frame, eyebrow quirked at the sight he had figuratively stumbled upon. It was the jingle of his newest accessory that broke her trance. You know, I'm fairly certain that requires two people to play. Identifying the voice, she looked towards the window to confirm her thoughts. Yo, he waved lazily, stepping down from the window, jingling as he did. Heyo Naruto-san, I didn't expect to see you today, she greeted, finding herself actually happier in his presence, despite her train of thoughts earlier. Well, I was in the neighborhood and decided I'd drop by and see how you were, his reply jovial as he sat down opposite the reed inspecting one of the chess pieces. Have you not played chess before? Naruto-san, seeing him shake his head, a small smirk formed on her lips. I could teach you how to play, that is if you're up for some friendly competition, her challenge offered. She needn't wait long for a response. I accept your challenge, Miss Gremory, but I warn you I won't hold back now, with a smirk of his own. 3 games later, now an hour into their 4th match with 2 wins to Rias and 1 to Naruto, they had been playing in silence since her loss, but it was starting to get oppressive, so Naruto decided speak. If you don't mind me asking, why chess? Does it represent something? He inquired, moving his knight to take her pawn. They do, as you know, we reincarnate others using items called evil pieces, and as you guessed they are based on chess pieces, but with special traits starting with the rook. A rook's trait is incredible strength and defense. She paused to move her pawn. I see, but I would assume there are drawbacks like speed, right? He noted as he analyzed the board. Yes, but the knight is the other side of the coin, being high in speed and agility, but low in strength, which is why most knights use weapons to increase their damage output. The next piece is the bishop. This piece is given enhanced magical capabilities for various spells. She smiled as Naruto moved his queen, leaving him open. And what of the pawn? I doubt it is merely cannon fodder like its namesake, still calm and collected, giving nothing away to the heiress. No, the pawn has the ability called promotion. It allows said pawn to temporarily gain the traits of other pieces, but only with permission of the king or enemy territory, she said, taking out his knight before continuing. Lastly, the queen. This piece is the most powerful and has the traits of the bishop, knight and rook. She finished, looking at the blonde, leading him to the same. Each devil that is medium class or higher is given a set of evil pieces and compete with their peerage in competitions called rating games, betting anything from wealth to territory for their spoils. She didn't mind telling him this since it was common knowledge in the supernatural world, but she hoped it got him interested in joining a peerage, hopefully hers. Naruto chuckled a bit at how similar it was to the Chunin exams, since they both were pretty much simulated war. His spoken thoughts caught the attention of his host. Naruto-san. I'm sorry, it's just these rating games are quite similar to something my people had called the Chunin exams, just a simulation of war harmlessly disguised as a tournament. It brings back memories. He guessed this world had more than a few similarities than he previously thought. For Rias, it wasn't the sort of information she was looking for, but she wouldn't complain. She was about to ask him more, but was interrupted by checkmate. How? Bewildered at how she could have missed his move. I believe that makes us tied for today. We should do this again sometime. I had fun. Smiling brightly, he picked up the item to his side and left through the front door, saying a quick hello to Akeno as he passed her. As the queen entered the room, she saw something akin to what Naruto did that morning. Aheyo, but are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. Akeno regaining herself. That's good then. I hope Naruto wasn't too upset losing to you. I hope. She laughed lightly, but stopped seeing her king's face. We tied, I don't know how, but he won the last round. Her eyes still glued to the pieces, trying to find his play, but was clueless. It appears you finally have a rival na. It was true. Even though she and Rias played regularly, it wasn't much competition for the genius Rias. Still, the idea that she tied was a little surprising. It appears Naruto-san is more than he seems. I didn't take him for a tactician or a monk, the brunette thought out loud as she went about odds and ends. What do you mean by monk? Curious what might have been said between the two in the hall. He was with you all day, but didn't you see the shakujo he had with him? It was pure black with 6 rings. She relayed what she knew dutifully before heading into the kitchenette, leaving Rias to her thoughts. Said Rias was mentally berating herself for not noticing it. He was right in front of her for hours, yet she hadn't noticed it until her friend mentioned it. As she straightened her position, a sigh escaped her lips. He left before I could offer to join the peerage. Sighing again as she slumped into the couch, she thought again about the blonde. Although she did learn more of his past, she was still fruitless in her search, and now she didn't know when she'd see him again. Oddly, she found her heart quicken at the thought, but shook it off as frustration. Who are you, Naruto? In a shopping mall at the center of town, our hero was currently perusing the shops and sites he could see, searching for something and trying to ignore the odd looks people were sending him. His current attire still the same one since he arrived here, including his newest addition, a shakujo. The monk's staff was something he had grown fond of during his life as a traveling sage, not only for its friendly appearance, it was how he came into possession of it. To be honest, he passed after the final battle between him and Madara and woke up in a hospital bed with it leaning against his bed, and according to the nurses, it had drained the chakra of everyone who tried moving it, so they just left it there. He didn't know why, but he felt a connection to the unassuming staff, like it was just natural to have, and since then he has kept it on him at all times in a seal below his wrist. Regardless, the soft yet distinct jingle of the shakujo echoed in the relatively empty mall as he made his way towards his destination. This is the place. I hope I have enough to get it, he mumbled, walking into an out-of-the-way music shop his clone had found the other day and apparently found something he would like. Opening the door, he walked to the back of the room, following his memories until he found it. Before him sat a beautiful acoustic guitar. Its body was unique in that it was made a mixture of metal and crimson wood swirled around the sound chamber's entrance, its neck matte black with silver markings with a matching headstock. He reached out to touch it before it was grabbed somewhat frantically. Following the arm, he met the face of the store owner. The man was largely muscled for his age, but it was obvious he had let himself go, dressed in a white tank top and well-worn denim jeans, giving him an old rocker look, emphasizing his build, complete with a black bandana covering his presumably bald head. Sir, I really wouldn't recommend touching that. If it's a guitar you're looking for, we have many others for sale. His eyes pleading with him to accept his offer and forget the instrument as if it was the plague. Why? What's wrong with it? Now immensely curious, he looked over the instrument, trying to sense any foul play. The middle-aged man was more than willing to tell him that young man is cursed and is responsible for putting 8 of its previous owners in hospital. It's because of this tainted thing that my shop is reduced to this state, he said, gesturing around the store. It was true, the place was pretty rundown, walls were faded and chipped, the roof panels stained from water damage, and the shelves didn't look like they could survive a stiff breeze, let alone the instruments they currently held. The others that would probably be enough to put them off the ominous-looking object, but Naruto believed there was more to this curse. You said they were hospitalized, did they say what the cause was? He had a theory, but he needed to confirm it, and store owner seemed to have been curious himself. Yes, the doctors told me they had suffered from severe exhaustion, but their body didn't show any signs of being overworked, almost like they had their energy stolen from them. His face now serious as he looked at Naruto intensely. Which is why I suggest you leave it be or end up like the rest. He turned and walked off to the register, confident that Naruto would leave well enough alone, but he didn't know our blonde that well. Might as well try it. No guts, no glory. He reached out and placed his palm against the wooden exterior, but felt nothing odd, no draining, nothing, at least until he tried charging it with his chakra. The metal weaved into the guitar started glowing dimly as it absorbed his chakra. Pulling his arm back, he couldn't stop the smile making its way to his face. As the glow faded away, he made his way to the front. Ah, so you decided to get something else. He asked with a well-practiced smile or just happy to have customer. Naruto couldn't decide. No, but I do have an offer. What would you say if I took that cursed guitar of yours for say 1,000 with some sheet music as a freebie? He hoped his offer was tempting enough for the man to accept. He was surprisingly hard to read. He seemed to be in thought before he spoke. I may hate it with a passion, but there's no denying the craftsmanship of it. I'll sell it for 2,000, 1,200, 1,800, 14, 16. You know no one else will buy it, old man. At this point both Naruto and the store owner were butting heads in a stare down until a minute later the owner backed down laughing as he did so. I like you kid, you've got guts. Alright, I give you the guitar for 1,500. I'll even throw in a case on the house. The large man, now quite jovial after their haggling, walked into the back room as Naruto went to collect his purchase. As he made his way back, new guitar in hand, he heard the owner's voice come the back room. I didn't get your name, kid. I'm Mitoki Jumanji. By the way, some ruffling was heard before Harry emerged and set the case down on the counter. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. A quick transaction later, Naruto left the shop and headed home. On his way out he happened to pass a rather expressful-looking girl on her cell phone, talking in a foreign language he didn't understand. He probably should learn other languages soon. He shrugged at the thought before continuing on his way. Sayori perspective, don't be scared, I just need to introduce her. Yeah, I know I hate it too, but I really didn't think they'd do it, you know. She checked her wristwatch, nodding to the garbled noise coming from her phone. They're sending me to some school that just went co-ed. Guess they think alienating me will set me straight, she sighed listening to her friend. I know, but it's just so weird being here without you. I'll try, but you know how most people are. I'm at the store, I'll talk to you later. Hanging her phone up, she slouched as she stopped in front of the uniform shop, her reflection superimposed over a mannequin of the Kuoh uniform. Sighing again, she went inside. Thousands of miles away from the place she called home and the only person she could call friend, it wasn't turning out the way she hoped. Entering the store, she went to the school aisle and saw the uniform she would be wearing for next year of her life. She decided on giving herself one last chance to believe maybe things will be better this time. 1 month before the start of school. With only 1 month left till the start of school, Naruto felt it was time to properly meet Ria's peerage. Sure, he'd seen them a few times before, but they weren't aware of that, so today he decided was as good as any. He hadn't just been laying around for the past few days either. Since he purchased his guitar, he had been testing it out with his clones, and now he had a small lake in front of the house. Needless to say, he was quite happy with odd instrument, and speaking of his house, it was finally finished and furnished. Nothing too fancy, just a 2-story house with 3 guest rooms near the back. Besides that, he had found himself quite fond of the chess games with Rias. It wasn't too different from shogi, perhaps a little simpler, but the young heiress wasn't a pushover because of that. What she lacked in experience she made up for with her sharp mind and tactical thinking. It very much reminded him of a young Shikamaru, except instead of a thinking pose, she put on glasses to think better. Speaking of which, checkmate, that makes it 2 and 2 once again. Naruto-san, it might not have sounded like much, but it was getting harder to win against the sage. Although it has only been tied so far, she had never lost a game at all before challenging him, so the experience was exciting for the redeed. It appears so, Rias. Well, now that's over, how have you been? You have been spacing out more than usual. She may have tried to hide it, but something important was on her mind, and it wasn't good. He could feel the negative emotions she didn't show openly. Putting on her smile, she answered, I'm fine, Naruto-san, I just have a lot on my mind at the moment, but you needn't worry for my sake, hoping to comfort him, but the frown forming meant it hadn't worked. That smile tells me more than you know, Rias. I am your friend, aren't I? If I can help in any way, you know my door is always open. She was a little taken back by the amount of concern his voice held, like he'd known her his whole life. She held a small smile this time, a true smile. I know, Naruto, and I thank you for that, but I hope I won't need to take that offer. Her voice only a whisper as she stared at her lap, hiding her solemn look as her eyes watered. Feeling a hand on her shoulder, she looked up at a smiling Naruto. Hey, none of that, we don't want the kids thinking their king has gotten soft, do we? Despite herself, she managed to chuckle at that, quickly drying her tears after taking her glasses off. You're right, thank you. It's what friends are for, he shrugged. Besides, we don't want your peerage thinking I'm the one who made you cry. It would make it awkward to introduce myself, he stated, sitting back down across from her. I was wondering when you were. They have been a little anxious not meeting you yet, given how often you're here. It was a little amusing seeing them arrive earlier each day to try and catch him before he left, but he somehow managed to leave just before they entered. I know, but I've had my fun for now, he finished just as Akeno entered with a tray of tea, looking a little shocked to see him still here. Oh, Naruto-san, I thought you would have left by now. It's a good thing I made extra. Putting the tray down, she went to sit by Rias. Yes, I decided to meet the rest of the family proper. I hope you don't mind. It's fine, Naruto-san, the more the merrier, she said, pouring the tea, smiling as she did. Bringing the cup up to his lips, he started counting down with the other hand. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. The door swung open, revealing a disheveled-looking Rook and an amused Knight. Good afternoon, Butchu. Akeno-senpai, he greeted, looking to the blonde sitting in Kaneko's spot. Seeing the look Rias answered Kiba-kun, Kaneko-chan, this is Naruto Uzumaki, the friend I told you about. Yo, good to finally meet you, and I see one of you found the trap, I said, amusement evident in his voice. I smiling to the two teens. Naruto-san, what trap are you talking about? Was she worried about a Rook? No, she was strong even by Rook standards, but annoyed. Yes, she a little annoyed he had set a trap for her to begin with. It was just a small prank to teach a life lesson, feeling as if that justified the large number of water balloons and hair dryers he had used. And what lesson was that, questioned the queen as she watched the poor girl try to comb her shaggy hair back into place, only for it to pop back up. Quite a simple one, and that is curiosity must be tempered with caution, for it can kill far more than just a cat, his finger raised as he imparted some of his wisdom to the devils. Unfazed or oblivious to the slightly ominous undertone, Kiba the forever gentleman walked over to his fellow blonde. It's good to meet you, Naruto-san. I'm Kiba Udo Butchu's knight. Shaking his hand he continued, I hope we can be great friends. Same here, Kiba, perhaps we can spar sometime, one swordsman to another. Nah. Nodding, the teen stepped back, cueing Kaneko to go next. Stepping forward, frown still in place, she spoke in her normal monotone, Kaneko Taoju, Rook, pleased to meet you. She quickly struck at the blonde, but it was stopped by his palm with meaty thump. I know we got off on the wrong foot, but there's no need for violence, especially with a punch like that. Had I been a lesser man it could have hurt me. Taking another sip of his tea as he finished. The widening of her eyes was her only visual response to a hit she expected to at least move him. The rest of the peerage were surprised as well, although they knew she would try it, they didn't expect him to brush it off. Even Rias was wary of Kaneko at full strength. Deciding to keep the conversation flowing, Rias spoke up, Kiba-kun, Kaneko-chan, Naruto here will be attending Kuoh Academy with us, so I expect you to get along. She looked at each of them to emphasize her point. He will also be joining the Occult Research Club, so if you see him around while I'm not here don't be worried, he is fully aware of our status as devils. Her piece finished, she waited for the questions bound to come. And on cue, Kiba was the first on. Naruto-san, are you a devil as well? No, I'm very much human, just not a normal one. All I can tell you is that I'm the last of my kind. Anything else you'll just learn along the way. His question answered yet confusing, he nodded curtly. Your eyes aren't human this time. Kaneko was the one to speak as she stared quite intently at his eyes from her spot beside him, like she was looking for any source of deception. Rias perked up at that as she too was curious about it, but felt it might have been a touchy subject to ask about. Sometimes her Rook's bluntness was useful. My eyes? Well, they are something I gained during my training. I'm not too sure about their origin myself, but I think they look good on me, he said, grinning at the young Nekomata sheepishly. He had theories why his pupils were slit-shaped, but he hadn't got a straight answer from either of his suspected causes, so he let it be. The rest of the meet was mostly discussions on menial subjects, from favorite sword styles to most hated candy flavor, but as the sun fell, it was time for the young devils to do their duties, leaving only Rias and Naruto alone once again. So you don't have anywhere to be like the rest. I'd have thought that you'd be doing the lion's share. A little confused, since the redeeds seemed to not leave the clubroom, ever. You must not know how devil contracts work, Naruto-san. She sat behind her desk and began flicking through paperwork that had somehow appeared there. Each devil, once they have reached a certain level, can be summoned using a flyer we hand out to the public, and once summoned we must fulfill the contract by granting a request. The more requests a devil completes, the higher their status becomes. I understand that part, but why aren't you being summoned then? At this, she stopped flicking through the documents on her desk and looked at him. Desire. That one word, seemingly the only answer she needed to give as the cogs in the Immortals' head whirred around, looking back on what he knew of devils in this world, often portrayed as beings of greed and lust, something that he knew could drive some to commit evil deeds. So for someone to summon a devil they need to have a strong desire for it to work. It was an educated guess on his part, but it made sense to him, since it wasn't all that different to his normal summons. His summons. I'm such an idiot, he mumbled as he slapped his forehead. With everything that has been happening, he had forgotten his contracts with his summon animals. He didn't even know if they still worked. Naruto-san, are you alright? Remembering he wasn't alone, he spun around, grinning sheepishly. I'm fine, but something has just come up, so I'll see you in a day or two. Take care of yourself. Waving, he sunshined away in his usual blue flames. Now alone, Rias was feeling confused about the friendly blonde. Whenever he was near her she felt better, like all negative thoughts were washed away, and her heart sped up when their eyes locked, but when he left she felt like a part of her was going with him. It felt like a summer's day with a cloud blocking out the sun. You know that you feel warm, but without the sun you can't help but shiver at its absence. Sighing in frustration, she rests her head on the desk, still warm from the midday sun, soothing her mind as she dozed off. At Naruto's Kuchius. The large plume of smoke that followed faded, revealing another disappointment for the blonde in the form of nothing. After he left Rias to her thoughts, he promptly tried summoning the toads, and with this failure making the 15th, it wasn't looking good. He hadn't attempted his other summons because they weren't really summons, but just figments of imagination. They didn't exist prior to summoning and won't after dispelling, merely puppets for him to control. Not the sort of thing he enjoyed doing to anything regardless of its origin. It seemed that his summons were incapable of moving through dimensions to this extent. It wasn't all bad, he supposed. If that last summon had worked, Ma and Pa would have given him an earful for jumping worlds to begin with. Disheartened at the lost connection to his home, he laid back on the grass and stared up at the blue sky, watching the birds pass by. It was nice, peaceful even, boss. We got his problem, never mind. Turning his head lazily to look at the clone, who was surprisingly a little worried but kept his calm. What is it now? He did hate how his clones managed to get into trouble of the dangerous kind, but they were him, so it was his fault in the end. Sometimes he wished his life was boring and uneventful. We tracked movement at the perimeter and found a woman. She's in critical condition. That got his attention. Screw a boring life, his was fine the way it was. He started his way towards the house when the clone said something that made him stop. Boss, she also seems to be a dragon, he said, a little hesitant. He slowly turned to the clone, eyebrow raised. Seems to be. Inside the house. He followed the clone inside his home, though the trail of blood was easy enough to follow, leading him upstairs to the center guest room at the end of hall. He opened the dark wooden door to see 3 clones working to keep the women stable, if she could be called. That is, what appeared to be scales covered her forearms and shins. The tail didn't help his doubt either. He sighed a little at her wounds from first glance. It looked like she wasn't going to survive for long, 2 days at most. He cast a look around the room as he approached what seemed to be her belongings, careful not to step on the bloodied rags and clothes on the floor. He noticed she had little to her name apart from clothes and food, like she had been in a hurry to get away, but from what? There she stopped bleeding. The trio of clones, wiping their brow of exertion, only now noticing his presence. So how bad is it? His inkling regarding her health was unfortunately on mark as he gazed upon their solemn looks. It's not good. She's not human, that's for sure, so we can't go off the knowledge. We have to help her, and what's worse is that her body isn't reacting as fast as we'd hoped to the treatment. It's like she's resistant to it. It was a harsh blow to the blonde. He had spent years of his life learning under Tsunade and Shizune to become a healer like them, reaching a level his mentors were proud, but to be told he wasn't good enough to save this woman, it hurt. Right, we'll just have to work harder then, won't we? His famous determination burning within at the statement. It's what got him where he was today, and it sure as hell wasn't going to fail him here. Boss, we are almost out of chakra, but before we disperse, it might be a good idea to see if Rias has any knowledge on dragons. He nodded in confirmation as the clones saluted and dispersed. Ignoring the minor headache of information, he created 3 more clones. I need you to watch over her and try to figure out her anatomy. I don't want to perform any surgery blind, understand, his doctor facade coming out as he ordered the clones. Hi, but I will head over to Rias and see what she knows, he said before walking out of the room with purpose in his gait. He wouldn't let this person die, not on his watch, that's a promise. Back with Rias, the silently dozing Rideed was roused from her sleep by the gentle shaking of her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open and saw her friend Akeno by her side, a gentle smile on her face as she looked at her king. Rias, you dozed off, are you okay? It's not like you to be so drained. She considered telling her friend about the feelings she's been experiencing and her frustrations, and perhaps she would have if the source of said problems hadn't just burst into the room looking quite worried. Naruto. What's wrong? She was slightly worried for her new friend. It was the first negative emotion she'd seen him express. Rias, I don't have long to explain, but do you have any books on dragon anatomy, specifically a human-shaped one? If she was worried before, she was shocked now. She didn't know what to say. Then she saw the blood on his hands. I don't know, but you're free to look at the study library. Akeno can show you to it. She had questions, but it could wait until whatever happened had calmed. Of course, but you, please follow me. Naruto and the brunette motioned for him to follow. Thank you, I know you have questions, but I promise when this is finished I will explain. He quickly walked to catch up with his guide and came to a large shelved wall near what looked like a study, but his eyes were busy scanning the spines for anything of relevance. He was halfway through when Akeno handed him a damp towel. His questioning look was answered by the brunette. You have blood on your hands, Naruto-san, you should wash it off before touching the books. The threatening undertone wasn't missed by him, and he accepted the towel to wash his hands. There must have been some on the dragon girl's possessions when he rifled through them. Thank you. As he wiped his hands clean, a book caught his eye. It had a symbol that looked like a dragon biting its tail embossed in silver on its spine. He had a gut feeling it was what he was looking for. He took it from the shelf to read the title, Dragon Forms and Anatomy. It seemed a little too good to be true, but he had experienced stranger coincidences in the past, so he didn't question it. Flicking through the pages, he came to a page titled Humanoid Dragons and read the first few lines. Dragons come in many different shapes and sizes, but only one dragon has been confirmed as being humanoid in shape. Ophis, the infinite dragon god, the mother of all dragons, has always been seen in the form of a human, given its ability to shape-shift regardless of size. Although not impossible, it is still unheard of for any other dragon to be born humanoid in shape. This hasn't stopped dragons from trying to mimic Ophis by either forcing a shape-shifter mating with a human for a hybrid offspring. This of course leads to the problem of the forced shapeshift killing the dragon, as its energy is compressed to exploding point, or in the hybrid the child dying from being unable to contain the power of a dragon. This leads us to believe that it requires exceptional genes from both parents for a hybrid be born, with the best case scenario being Office herself, partnering with a male or female. I have had the express honor of examining the corpses of unsuccessful children to further understand the creatures, and the book continued into very detailed notes on the inner workings of the hybrids, and although he didn't particularly like the reason this information was available, he was grateful for it. He turned and left, noticing that Kuoh wasn't with him. He entered the clubroom and saw her in her spot behind Rias, said girl, looking his way, glasses now perched on her nose. "Ah, Naruto-san, I take it you found what you were looking for," noticing the book in his hand as she asked. "Hi, I hope you don't mind lending it to me for a day or two," he asked, his tone calmer than he was earlier, even allowing a small smile take form. "That is fine, as long as it isn't ruined in the process." She had something akin to hate for smudges and stains in books, something she got from her love of manga and the extensive collection she had at home. Imox saluted. "You have my word, I should get going," and for the second time that day he vanished in a column of azure flame, leaving the retreat a little empty. Her expression must have shown how she felt when Kuoh suddenly grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to face the brunette. "Rias, I need to know what is going on with you, please tell me." As a friend, her face stern but still worried for her. Deciding it wasn't a great idea to hide it, she took a calming breath before looking toward her friend. "Okay, I'll tell you." Naruto's house, study. It had been a few hours since he left, and inside his study, the blonde was going over the notes his clones had left out for him and was a little surprised that the anatomy of the woman was not as different as it seemed, but what was worrying him was her energy flow. It wasn't like a chakra system, in fact there wasn't a system at all. From what the book suggested and the notes confirmed was that the flesh and soul of a dragon were the source of their power, with their soul giving off a power constantly and the flesh acting as a battery absorbing it, but there lies the problem. The way his Iryojutsu work is by flowing into the body without having to open the person up to perform the task, but this requires a precise control, something her body is making very difficult to accomplish, not only because her energy was fighting his, but the wounds he was trying to heal were in critical areas. Her heart being a major concern to him, it was punctured through the right ventricle, leaving the smaller one to maintain blood flow, but he knew it wouldn't last long. He wasn't without a plan though. Oh no, he knew how to work around the problem, but it might kill the patient, as he said she didn't have chakra or a pathway to speak of, so he had no idea what it would do to her, and he wasn't one to take chances with another's life. The blonde decided to get some advice from a little green friend he knew. Performing a few hand seals, he slammed his hand onto the desk, and in a small puff smoke, Kuoh appeared looking a little surprised. "Kuoh, I need your help with something. There's a bag of candy in it for you." He couldn't help but smile at the energetic familiar, but the moment was bittersweet for the blonde. He still needed to save his patient. 2 hours later, as the sun peeked over the horizon, our blonde had his plan set for execution, as he and 2 clones with enough juice to make a cage sweat were positioned around the as yet unnamed woman, ready to begin. As Naruto looked over the Jane Doe, he was certain it was now or never, as his patient had begun to deteriorate from her stable state. "Alright, let's begin the draining process." During his preparation, Naruto had decided to take a safer route than just lowering her reserves completely and instead focus on the areas he is working on. He hoped that her energy would help the healing process once he was done. All 3 blonde slowly draining power from her chest, abdomen and neck, where the critical injuries were located, keeping an eye on her vitals with their free hand. "Okay, good, it seems to be working well. I want to go for the heart puncture first, the others can wait." Receiving a nod from his assistants, he began sending out his medical chakra to the right ventricle of her heart to repair it. Thankfully whatever caused the damage wasn't serrated, or he might have had to do something very stupid. It was a slow process. Even with her power drained away, it was resistant to the medical chakra, along with being much thicker in muscle than a human's. He did notice that her skin on her chest began forming a scale-like texture, which was odd, but he took it as a good sign. An hour had passed by the time he had stitched a heart chamber together and made sure it functioned properly, and by doing this, he noticed she had an extra heart chamber near the back, which he proposed was a byproduct of being a hybrid, but made sure to file that away for later. Okay, now on to the neck injury. Any change in her vitals? He glanced over to his clone positioned at the abdomen, who was looking a little confused. None, in fact the scales from earlier are starting to appear on the abdomen too, but there is an unknown here, boss. He didn't need to ask, as he noticed through their linked vision the golden scales forming on their hands. It appeared that absorbing dragon energy directly into himself wasn't such a bright idea. This was unexpected, but we have to continue, we won't have a second chance at this. In truth, he was a little worried at its implications, but decided to treat it like nature chakra. As he moved to the neck, he almost sighed at how much damage it suffered, but equally amazed at how resilient this young woman was for surviving this long. He quickly scanned over the area to make sure he hadn't missed anything. 20 lacerations and 3 deep puncture wounds near the spinal cord, but thankfully no broken bones. Whatever were you running from? He mumbled his thoughts as he focused on the puncture wounds while his clone worked on the lacerations, as they were rather trivial compared to the other injuries. Another hour passed as Naruto carefully sealed the last of the 3 stab wounds. It would have gone quicker, he had found a foreign body lodged in a vertebrae, so a steady pace was required. Placing the shard onto a tray beside him, he wiped his brow of sweat using his sleeve, taking a moment to stare at the scales he could feel encroaching along his arm at a slow pace. He could tell that his clones were getting nervous. Nodding tiredly, he moved to final wound, which wasn't life-threatening, but it would take the longest to heal. Due to a powerful blunt impact to the abdominal area, the hip had fractured, the left femur was broken in 2 places, and her kidney has ruptured. The bones would take time to heal, there was no getting around that, but the kidney was what required his attention, once again as he focused on her internal injury, while his now free clone aligned and set her bones. An hour later, the operation a success, he and his clones cleaned up the room, leaving the woman to heal and recover her lost energy. Speaking of which, this is going to be more trouble than I thought. The mentally exhausted blonde was sat on the couch in his lounge, his head resting in his scale-covered hands. That wasn't all, as he was now without a shirt, showing his well-toned physique also covered in the mystery scales. If one were to see him now, it would look like someone had started painting his body, then left it unfinished. In his relief of the successfully saving the Dragoness, he had forgotten that any unused energy and shadow clones returned to the creator, which lead to the scales growing along his arms to his shoulders and across his torso, with patches appearing randomly over other parts of his body. He now was silently berating himself for his stupidity when he had an idea. So it's just energy, right? Might as well try and get some use out of it. The grin that stretched across his face would have frightened any who knew Naruto, because what followed afterwards was usually large amounts of property damage that would put Tsunade to shame. If any were able to see past a barrier protecting his property, they would have seen large dragons made of the elements themselves clashing in the sky in glorious explosions, and the maid cackling that accompanied. 2 days later, we find our blonde sat in one of the deck chairs on his front porch, gazing upon a battlefield that had once been his front lawn. Craters and trenches scarred the landscape, but were quickly being cleared up by a group of clones using various earth techniques. The blonde himself was glaring a little at his bandaged arms. The reason for the bandages? Well, it appeared that his overzealous use of the borrowed dragon power had injured his arms, but not in the way one would expect. It would seem that dragon fire and lightning was not only powerful but difficult to control, but most importantly difficult to heal from. He supposed it was karma for acting like a kid with matches, or maybe it was punishment for something stupid he had done in the past. I'm so bored. He had been out here since this morning after checking in on the now recovering woman. She would be fine in a week or so, but it was a question of when she'd regain consciousness. It was becoming irritating not knowing her name. "Alright, I'm going out for lunch, don't wait up for me," he yelled out to the clones as he walked to town. He decided to unseal his guitar, just in case he finds a good place to play. In the town cafe district, as Naruto walked along the path towards a cafe, he was deep in thought about his recent development, not the Jane Doe, but the scales from last night. He could still feel them on his skin, but when he looked he couldn't see them, like they were waiting to be triggered by something. But what? When he had spent all the energy he'd collected last night, the scaled skin faded to his normal tan color, even the texture had disappeared, unlike his patience. It was something he would have to ask the girl when she awoke, but when would that be? She could easily stay unconscious for a month at most, he had seen it before. The sage was so deep in thought he didn't sense the girl around the corner until "Hey, watch it," came the angry cry of a young purplet currently glaring at the blonde from her spot on the ground. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." Here he extended his only unbandaged hand to help her up, pausing for but a moment when she took it. She was going to yell at the blonde for the hit, but couldn't find it in herself to do so when she saw his injured arms, and instead mumbled a thanks as she dusted herself of. During this, Naruto looked over the girl and remembered her as the one speaking in a foreign language at the mall. It helped she was wearing the same clothes as last time. She was dressed in an undone red jacket, revealing a dark gray t-shirt with a yellow stripe down the left side with dark blue ripped jeans. Her unique style would have her stand out almost anywhere. "I'm Naruto, by the way," offering his hand once again, hoping to break the awkward silence that threatened to settle. "Sayuri," she replied, almost in relief that he had continued to talk to her. He was intrigued by the uniquely dressed teen and decided that she needed a friend. "Hey, I was on my way to get a bite to eat. If you want you can join me." My treat, his signature grin in full effect, hoping she'd accept. She seemed hesitant at first, but it quickly changed to eagerness. "Sure, I'm not one to pass up free food." "Cool." The cafe's just up the road. They both made their way in the direction Naruto had been walking. Along the way, Sayuri proved to be quite talkative. "So what's with the getup? You look like some kind of cosplayer." It was a blunt question, but reasonable, he guessed. It's not like what he wore was normal gear anymore. "I could say the same to you, but no, I'm not a cosplayer, it's just something I like to wear." There was more to that obviously, but he couldn't tell her the real reason. "Hey. What I wear is perfectly normal overseas." Her expression showed she was quite proud of that, but Naruto felt the pang of sadness that popped up when she mentioned overseas. "I wasn't judging you for it. I think everyone should learn to express themselves however they want, either through clothing, music or cooking." Cooking? She looked at him like he had spoken in gibberish. Cooking is a very large way of expressing who you are. When you cook, you are making something that embodies you. Every ingredient, the way you cook it, how you season it, all of it is you expressed through an art. Sayori was hooked on his words. It wasn't something she had thought about, but it made sense. She was finding the older teen to be quite interesting to listen to. During their discussion, they had arrived at the cafe and sat at one of the outdoor tables when she noticed a guitar case he removed from his shoulder and placed beside his seat. "Oh, cool. You play the guitar, are you any good?" Her bright personality coming through in her question. "I'm okay, I guess. I haven't been playing very long." It was true, back in the elemental nations there were a few instruments similar to those here, but the guitar was new to him at least. He knew what was going to happen next when he saw her eyes light up with childish joy. Deciding to let her enjoy herself, he spoke, interrupting her question. "I will play a song after we order. Remember, it's my treat." Her cheeks a little pink at being so easily figured out, but she looked through the menu in search of something to her taste. Doing the same, he noticed the waitress appear by the table. She seemed to be in her early 20s with brown hair done up in a bun and had a nice figure. He did notice her glance his way every now and then, but ignored it. "Hello and welcome to Cafe Yatsuhashi. May I take your order?" Holding up her pad and pen with a well-practiced smile. "I will have a sushi platter with iced tea, Sayori. I'll have a dango platter and some water." "Okay, your orders will be with you shortly." Leaving the two alone, Sayori turned to look at Naruto with expectant eyes. "Alright, I'll play you a song, okay?" No need to rush. He bent down and retrieved his guitar, its appearance receiving a variety of looks from the other cafe customers. "What kind of guitar is that?" He was expecting the question since its ominous or cool appearance in his opinion was very unusual. He smiled slyly. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Setting the guitar on his lap, he took a moment to pick a song before closing his eyes. Song? Iris Acoustic by Ronan Keating. "And I'd give up forever to touch you. Cause I know that you feel me somehow. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be. And I don't want to go home right now. And all I can taste is this moment. And all I can breathe is your life. And sooner or later it's over. I just don't want to miss you tonight. And I don't want the world to see me. Cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken. I just want you to know who I am. And you can't fight the tears that ain't coming. Or the moment of truth in your lies. When everything feels like the movies. Yeah, you bleed just to know you're alive. And I don't want the world to see me. Cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken. I just want you to know who I am. And I don't want the world to see me. Cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken. I just want you to know who I am. And I don't want the world to see me. Cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken. I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am." A round of applause brought the blonde back to his senses. Looking around, he saw the other cafe goers and staff clapping, with Sayori staring an odd expression, smiling brightly. A little embarrassed at the attention, he smiled back, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. He noticed the waitress from earlier arriving with their orders, but her smile more genuine this time around. Placing the tray of food and drink on the table, Naruto pulled out the money for the food when she lifted her hand, stopping him. "This is on the house. If you play a few more songs." Her challenging stare egging him on, he turned to Sayori, who nodded eagerly at the request. Outnumbered, he sighed, but it was all in good fun, and began playing again. His few songs became a small concert as he played through the lunch rush, much to the joy of customers and random passers-by. A few hours later, Naruto and Sayori had left the cafe satisfied with the day they've had. They made their way to the corner. They had run into each other, and Sayori was strangely quiet. Not liking the odd silence, he decided to indulge his curiosity. "A penny for your thoughts." She didn't answer straight away, hesitant with what she had to say. Naruto, she seemed so vulnerable now compared to the bright personality he had spent his afternoon with. "Will I see you again?" "Of course you will. You're going to Kuoh Academy, aren't you? We can hang out there." Hoping that quelled her fears. She seemed to cheer up at that. "Right, also I was wondering what happened to your arms." Now staring at his bandages forearms as they walked. "Oh, I had a small accident involving fire and stupidity." He chuckled a little at the memory of last night. He may have gone overboard, but it was a lot of fun. "Well, make sure you're more careful next time. I'd like to keep a friend longer than a day." She looked away, perhaps a little embarrassed by how caring it was, but it made him happy to know she cared for his well-being, the kind of friend he could count on. He ruffled her hair playfully. "Sure thing, kid." Grumbling as he did so, she glared at the blonde. "I'm only a year younger than you." Ignoring her complaint, he stopped at the corner, prompting Sayori to do the same. "Well, I guess this is us now." "Yeah, I guess it is," she replied dejectedly at their time together coming to an end. "Hey, cheer up, goodbye aren't forever, you know." With it, he walked off towards his home, waving over his shoulder as he did so. But eyes aren't forever repeating what she'd heard as he watched his back shrink into the distance before walking towards her house. Naruto's house, study. After arriving home he went up to his study to look over the medical notes he had written down, trying to find some connection to the mysterious golden scales he had somehow grown, but his scrutiny was cut off as the doorbell went off. Nobody should know where he lived yet, but sensing the person out he struggled to withhold the sigh threatening to escape. When he opened the door he saw the ever-smiling Akeno at his door and a sheepish-looking Koda hovering behind her shoulder. He should have known that she would get him to talk. Hello Akeno, what brings you here so late at night?" he asked, glancing to the clock in the foyer. It was well past midnight. Damn, he was up there longer than he thought. "Naruto-san, you know we devils are most active at night." He restrained from palming his forehead at the obvious answer and instead motioned for the queen to enter. "Ah, I forgot, sorry, I've been occupied on something quite important." She stopped looking around the foyer and tuned to Naruto, an innocent expression plastered on her face. "Something to do with that book you were after?" So that's what she was here for. He couldn't blame her for coming here. His sudden request had Rias thinking before he had left. He knew of her glasses habit and it was only a matter of time until her curiosity got the better of her. "Yes, if you are here on Ria's behalf please just tell me, there is no need for hidden agendas." He made his way to the kitchen to the right of the foyer, filling the kettle and set it on the stove. "It seems you saw through me quite quickly, but you are only half right. I want to ask you some questions if you don't mind complying with the request." They moved to the lounge. The room was on the opposite side of the stairs, with red leather couches arranged in a semicircle facing a large flat screen. A dark gray coffee table in the center finished the room off. Akeno sat on the center couch while Naruto sat in the armchair to her right closest to the kitchen. There was a moment of silence before Akeno spoke. "What does Rias mean to you?" The question was a little out of the blue to the blonde. He knew what she was implying, but he hadn't given it much thought. What did the heiress mean to him? "She is a friend, that to me is someone precious, someone I would give my all to protect and die for." His unwavering stare glued to the raven-haired girl as he spoke. It was a little unnerving even to the young sadist. "I see, but do you feel anything more for her, more than a friend?" She knew it was prying to ask and could lead to awkward tension between them, but she wanted to make sure. "Do I love her?" She nodded, his features softened at the thought. Could he love? Was he allowed to love in this world or would it be taken by time once again? He had loved before, but it was short-lived, at least to him it was. They had shared their first kiss, their first night they had given body and soul to each other only for tomorrow to bring her last breath. He had moved on since then and lived in solace, but it was still a part of him that was missing, but perhaps he could learn to love again. He hadn't noticed the tears he had shed until he looked at the small patches of moisture on his leg, drying his eyes as he answered. "No." Akeno looked down solemn at his answer, but understood where he was coming from. She saw the look in his eyes and knew he had lost someone like that before, and how couldn't she recognize them? She had seen that look before in her own when her mother had passed away. She was about to get up when Naruto continued. "I don't love her yet, but I would be lying if I said I didn't feel anything for her." He met her hopeful expression with his own. "All I ask is that you give a scarred heart time to reach out again." Glad that the trip wasn't wasted, she nodded gratefully. Just as the kettle's whistle sounded through the house, Naruto left the lounge to tend to it while Akeno looked around the room, taking notice of the bare walls and general empty feeling the room gave. Her eye caught the sight of a few picture frames on a shelf behind her and went to look. There were pictures of what appeared to be a teen Naruto with a large group of teens all different in appearance, but one thing they did share was their smile. And the one beside that was the picture of a happy couple, one a man with golden blonde hair dressed quite similarly to Naruto with his arm around a very pregnant-looking Rias, cradling her stomach lovingly as they both smiled at the camera. "My parents." Despite herself she jumped a little at his voice, turning to face him as he placed the tea on the coffee table, returning to his seat. "They look very happy." Yes, they were. She almost winced at that. Deciding to move on from the obviously painful memory, she sat down and took a sip of her tea, thinking on what to say next, but she didn't need to as Naruto spoke up this time. "In regards to your other reason for being here, I found an injured woman with dragon-like features in the outlying forest. She was dying, Akeno, and I needed to know her anatomy to save her." She sighed inwardly at his explanation. Rias and her had gone over many possibilities for what he was doing and were glad it was this and not something else. Akeno, will absorbing large amounts of dragon energy cause any odd effects? It was an odd question to Akeno, at least until she took notice of his bandaged arms. "I'm not sure. It is quite a potent source of energy, so it could affect many aspects of another being in some way, but you look like you've already experienced one of them, Naruto-san." The only D at her assumption as they fell into a reasonably comfortable silence. It lasted for a while before Akeno decided to ask him something. "I take it you know the importance of what she is, Naruto-san." It wasn't a question more than a statement, but he nodded in response. "I do. She shouldn't be possible from what the book I borrowed stated." "Indeed, which is why you are responsible for her," the queen stated slyly. "What do you mean?" "I was looking after her anyway." He was confused to where she was going with this. That's good to hear, but now you officially responsible for her as ordered by Rias. Ah, that's what she meant. It was a clever move from the Gremory, as with him being her official guardian, recognized by the Gremory house she is by proxy under their protection as well. He'd have to thank her for that sometime later. I'm sorry to cut this short, but I need to get back to Butchu before she gets worried. She got up and bowed politely for the tea. No need to apologize, Akeno, it was nice to talk to you, here let me walk you to the door. Ara, such a gentleman, perhaps I should just take you for myself, she teased him with her sultry gaze that would have had lesser men blush and splutter, but our hero merely smiled back at her. She followed behind him to the foyer, but before he reached for the door, she asked a question that had been bothering her since she arrived. Naruto-san, I am curious as to why I couldn't teleport here. She had tried to do so before coming here to save time, but it wouldn't work. She knew the spell was strongest when a circle was placed on the ground to link it to, but it should have worked. That would be my doing, I'm afraid. Call me old-fashioned, but I prefer it when people use the door rather than appearing in my house at random. He playfully glared at the girl since he had felt her attempts to do just that whilst in the study. He had hoped she would give up, but when she knocked on his door, he couldn't just ask her to leave. Not that he hadn't enjoyed their talk, it was just a little annoying. The brunette merely smiled that mixed smile of hers. I will remember that in the future, Naruto-san. Good night. With it, she made her way outside onto the stone path before manifesting her wings and taking flight. Shaking his head at her little display, he headed inside for the night. Collecting the empty cups in the lounge, he put them into the sink and made his way upstairs. It's been quite an eventful week, hasn't it? Hopefully things will quiet down when school starts. He couldn't have been more wrong with that statement, for adventure was just over the horizon for not only him, but those close to him.